Chapter 501, The History of Baton. It had been over a month since they left Kaugust. During that time, no one else had come to pursue Saul. In the end, it was Mordon, who was more familiar with Baton, who guessed some of it based on Anne's account. Mordon, the inverted tree, and Asonia. I haven't heard of that name before, but judging from how it tracked us and even commanded a first-rank true wizard, it must possess third-rank strength. And such a terrifying entity, and it even has a master. Could its master be? But Agu shook his head. It can't be a fourth rank. I think this so-called master is more likely the inverted tree itself, or some third rank who has control over it. Why? Saul asked. Because of magic radiation. If a fourth-rank wizard was present, there's no way they could conceal their presence. I've never seen one myself, but I've heard that a fourth rank stands out like a bright lamp in a dark house. Mordon, true, there are only a handful of fourth ranks in this world. One wouldn't just appear out of nowhere. Honestly, I suspect that the master of the inverted tree is the old dean of Baton Academy. This part of history was something Saul knew a bit about. I read in a book that when the Baton family came out of the borderland, they had only a little over 100 people left. But because they had a third-rank wizard among them, they demanded that the Kema Empire give up half its land. Mordon had the most authority on this matter. However, since half his soul body disappeared after death and the other half turned into a heavily polluted wraith, his memories and emotions about the events of that time had become blurry. Mordon, I don't even remember why I dared to go to war with Baton back then. I only recall that their third-rank wizard broke the agreement not to slaughter large numbers of low-rank wizards and ordinary people. He brought down an entire mountain and crushed over 10,000 of my soldiers to death. There was no expression in the writing, but Saul could feel the sorrow and fear in Mordon's heart through the diary. A single strike from a third-rank wizard could destroy an entire city. Combined with the unique terrain of Hanging Hands Valley, the Kema Empire ultimately lost the war, paying the price of over 100 wizards and apprentice wizards, along with countless ordinary lives. The empire splintered as a result. But Baton's third-rank wizard died shortly after unleashing that powerful spell. Without their third rank, Baton, though victorious, was forced to retreat to a coastal city under mediation from other third-rank wizards. After occupying a corner of Kema's territory, they did not expand outward again. Instead, they recruited a large number of wizards and apprentices and established Baton Academy. The academy dedicated itself to researching all kinds of novel magical tools and eventually transformed the city of Kaugust, where it was located, into a unique, modern metropolis. And back then, the one who proposed we concentrate all our forces to fight Baton was Dumo of the Bloodrose family. I was against it, but Dumo was a wizard more favored by the family than me, so I failed. Who would have thought everything he did was for the sake of a vague and illusory legend, wanting to kill off all his close blood relatives? Oh, that explanation. Saul immediately thought of a certain great fraud. One of the wizard families of the old Kema Empire had indeed been among Kismet's victims. Herman, so you're from the Bloodrose family. How did your soul end up in the Bloodthorn family's laboratory with Ralph? And I was one of the few survivors from Hanging Hands Valley. I accidentally discovered the family's destruction was largely tied to Dumo, so I stole his treasure and hid it among the Bloodthorn family's branch group, which had long since separated from the main family and fled the capital. Later, I was discovered by a Bloodthorn wizard. Combined with the pollution I suffered, I died on the way. Afterward, I drifted aimlessly until I was awakened by my master. So when you found Dumo's psychic signature on the route that attacked you outside Kaugust, you were already planning to seek him out again and take revenge through reverse devouring. As Saul said this, the atmosphere inside the carriage grew tense. Even if Anne had her reasons, Her private actions and concealed truth couldn't be easily forgiven. Saul had already punished her using the diary. Once a consciousness became a black page, a single thought from Saul could inflict unbearable pain upon them. After a few days of obedient punishment, and handed over a piece of knowledge she had stolen from Dumo, the ultimate form of flesh magic, flesh-soul fusion. Combined with the third-rank fire element spell Lava Eruption from the fifth black page, Kent, Saul no longer had to worry about lacking high-level spells to study, at least for now. Next, Saul, carrying several chests of wraiths he had acquired from Shea, advanced resolutely toward the borderland with tense but determined resolve. Meanwhile, inside Baton Academy, which Saul had been on guard against for over a month, new changes were taking place. "Master Bate, I don't understand." Dean Pond's sentence was cut short. "Call me Bate." The gaunt woman wore a floor-length, high-collared gown of dark blue, her exposed skin appearing deathly pale in contrast. But she was too thin, so much so that she had lost all traces of feminine delicacy. She looked more like a skeleton propping up a dress. And this skeletal woman was actually being called Mentor by Dean Pond. "Bate, didn't you say Saul's soul body was very special? Why not send someone to capture him again? He's clearly grown suspicious. He might never return." Pond seemed anxious, a far cry from the friendliness he had shown Saul. The way he took that soul from the tree's heart really was unique. Even Andasonia couldn't best him, Bates said, her hands resting calmly in front of her abdomen, expression serene. "But he carries a chaotic aura and another hidden one. I don't want to interact with either of them right now. Let him go." "Even you can't deal with it?" Pond was stunned. Was Saul really just a first-rank wizard? Why did he carry so many secrets? "I'm not in a position to act yet. One of the auras on Saul comes from Gorsa. He may be stationed in the Northern Sea now, but he clearly hasn't abandoned his little apprentice. As for the other force, I can't identify it, but I suspect it's connected to the eyeball pollution that Kent carried." At the mention of eyeball pollution, even the second-rank wizard Pond's expression changed. That pollution didn't seem to actively spread. Otherwise, back in that high-rise building, none of us would have made it out alive. Bate lowered her head, staring at her toes in silence. She didn't tell Pond the full truth, that those eyes gave her a terrible feeling. It was as if they were some kind of gaze from another world. Until she completed her nutrient absorption plan, she didn't want to provoke that kind of existence. "Forget it, the pollution has vanished now. We need to continue developing the city." Bate raised her head, straightened her spine, and silently walked forward. "Kaugust still needs more ordinary people and more wizards." Chapter 502, The Crazy Gorsa. The sky was azure, clear after the rain. The sea breeze, with its distinctive salty tang, filled Maria's nostrils. At this moment, she was standing atop the Wall of Sighs, located at the northernmost edge of the Stat continent, gazing down at the gray-blue sea beneath her feet and listening to the flapping of her wizard robes in the wind. The Wall of Sighs was a colossal structure, 200 meters high. From the sky, it appeared as a seamless fortress stretching endlessly, forming a right angle that tightly enclosed the northern end of the continent behind it. The bricks, clay, and binding materials used to forge this massive wall were all rare magical components, maintained over centuries by generations of high-ranking wizards through complex formations. The wall had withstood countless black tide tsunamis each year and still stood firm. Maria was one of the patrol wizards stationed on the Wall of Sighs, responsible for regularly inspecting the state of the wall in preparation for the annual black tide. The black tide brought pollution with it. After every wave, wraiths, monsters, and even injured or mentally unstable wizards would sometimes mutate due to the contamination. Thus, Maria had another task, periodically visiting the wizards stationed in towers beyond the Wall of Sighs to assess their condition, and ensure no one had quietly undergone pollution and might, in turn, aid the black tide when it came. Today, Maria was scheduled to visit a third-rank wizard named Gorsa. Although Maria herself was also a third-rank wizard, she had no prominent family like the Glare family behind her, and from what she'd heard, Gorsa's strength ranked among the very top within the Glare family. The only issue was his eccentric personality. Despite mastering short-range teleportation, he couldn't even be bothered to visit the wizard towers next door. Not only did he choose one of the towers furthest from the Wall of Sighs upon arrival, but for the past few months since arriving at the Sighing Sea, he hadn't been seen stepping outside. Whenever the status of each wizard tower was checked from within the wall, the light indicator on Gorsa's tower always showed white, occupied. Today was no exception. Maria, another patrol wizard Salat, arrived. "Sorry to keep you waiting." He was a wizard from a prominent family on the Nefrit continent, and Maria was careful not to offend him. She smiled and said, "No worries. I was just taking a moment to enjoy the sea view." Salat turned to look at the sea as well. "As long as the sea hasn't turned black, I actually enjoy the view. Haha." Gazing at the towering wizard towers rising from the ocean in the distance, he added, as if cheering himself on, "Today we're covering the 2 farthest wizard towers. Once we finish today's task, the rest will be much easier." Maria didn't believe distance necessarily equated to danger, but she nodded anyway. "Let's get going then." The two of them rose into the air together, a layer of defensive shielding forming around their bodies. Outside the shield, 2 rings of runes rotated slowly in a cross pattern around them. This was mandatory protection when leaving the Wall of Sighs. Even though it wasn't currently black tide season, remnants of contamination and monsters could still lurk in the sea. They flew together for several kilometers before separating to visit different wizard towers. Gorsa of the Glare family came from the Escaper branch, which had long-standing tension with the Nefrit continent Salat. Thus, Salat would never willingly visit a wizard from the Escaper side. Once separated, Maria flew with even greater caution. Even at the cost of reducing her speed, she activated an additional protective talisman. Before long, she finally arrived at the 7th wizard tower, Gorsa. Maria took a moment to tidy her wind-blown robes before descending onto the tower's roof. "Wizard Gorsa, I'm Maria, patrol wizard from the Wall of Sighs, here for a routine visit." Maria sent a message spell into the tower. "One moment, please." Not 2 seconds later, a gentle and soft voice responded. Maria had never seen Gorsa before, but rumor had it he was quite the handsome man. Even as a third-rank wizard, she couldn't help feeling a trace of anticipation. A minute later, the tower's black door finally creaked open. A skeletal white hand reached out from within. Then the bones disappeared into an oversized wizard robe, though judging from the robe's contours, whatever arm was inside likely wasn't human either. The door opened fully, revealing a face entirely devoid of skin, blood-red and seemingly about to start steaming. Maria nearly used the full force of her third-rank composure to keep from reacting. "Hello, Wizard Gorsa." Though she had never seen him before, the aura emanating from this skinless figure unmistakably belonged to a third-rank wizard. "Hello. If I may ask, were you attacked?" Maria took out a golden stone. This was a recording stone that would capture her entire visit. When she returned to the Wall of Sighs, another wizard would review the footage to ensure that neither she nor the visited wizard showed signs of abnormality. "No, I conducted an experiment," Gorsa said, lifting a skeletal finger to poke at the muscle on his face. A stream of bright red trickled down the stark white bone, a striking contrast, almost beautiful. "It went slightly wrong. I'm waiting for the contamination to subside." "Contamination? Maria's expression immediately changed. Her job was precisely to check for contamination among tower-bound wizards. "May I examine your body?" "No," Gorsa replied with calm and firm resolve. Maria took a deep breath. She knew most wizards wouldn't let others examine their physical state, especially those of equal standing, like fellow third-rank wizards. Third-rank wizards were rare and powerful in most places, but here at the Wall of Sighs, both patrol and stationed wizards were required to be at least second rank. And the Glare family only sent third-rankers to this most perilous frontline. Only families of such stature could afford that. "Then may I ask what caused your contamination? I need to know the source to ensure the situation is under control." This time, Gorsa didn't refuse. He even invited Maria into the wizard tower to examine things personally. Maria cast a wary glance at him, but his skinless face revealed no emotion. Still, every wizard stationed here had signed the alliance oath. She reasoned he wouldn't dare attack her outright. Suppressing her unease, Maria followed Gorsa into the wizard tower. The interior was dark, with only a flickering oil lamp far ahead. But for two third-rank wizards, such dimness was of no concern. They moved forward unhindered until they reached Gorsa's laboratory. The moment she entered, Maria saw a barrel of black liquid on the floor. Her eyes immediately locked onto the barrel, ignoring everything else in the room. "Is that black tide?" "Yes, I retained a portion from the last wave for research." Maria couldn't help but glance once more at this bloodied wizard. Gorsa wasn't the only wizard who had ever captured black tide for study, but he'd only been here a few months and was already daring to work on it. Truly bold and crazy, Maria thought to herself. At that moment, Gorsa lifted both skeletal hands, presenting them like works of art. "I tried making contact with the black tide. The flesh on my hands rotted away. Although I treated it in time, the contamination still corroded the skin." Watching Gorsa describe his injuries so casually, Maria tightened her grip on the recording stone. "I suggest you request a leave of absence for recovery." "Unnecessary. But the next black tide might strike as early as this month." Gorsa stretched the muscles on his face, revealing a pristine set of white teeth. "It's fine. I'll be better by tomorrow." Chapter 503. Return to Hanging Hands Valley. Maria didn't stay in Gorsa's wizard tower for even 5 minutes. With the excuse that she needed to visit the next wizard, she quickly took her leave. Gorsa returned to the laboratory, stepping right past the bucket on the floor. The black tide, which the two had just been discussing and studying, was casually left behind by him. As he walked closer to the wooden shelf by the wall, the skin on his body began to regenerate layer by layer, as if the wounds from earlier were nothing but an illusion to fool others. While walking, Gorsa reached for his chest, where pale skin had just grown back. The robe automatically parted slightly. His fingertip passed through the skin beneath the robe, sinking into his chest. With a hooked motion outward, he dragged out a shadow. He tossed the shadow to the ground. It slowly wriggled, taking on shape and color, gradually becoming Yura's figure. But this Yura appeared dazed, with none of the madness she had shown when she tried to overturn the wizard tower. Gorsa looked down at the girl sitting to his side on the floor. "Do you like that woman's skin just now?" A flash of disgust quickly passed through Yura's confused eyes. "No." Gorsa shook his head with a faint smile. "What a pity." He continued forward, arriving at a wooden shelf Maria hadn't noticed. It was fixed to the wall. The lower layers held various commonly used magic materials, while the top 4 layers were filled with similar-looking spherical flasks. Each flask contained a transparent liquid, and at the center of the liquid was a fine gray wisp, like a strand of hair. These gray wisps gently swayed up and down. Yura got up from the floor, curiously following Gorsa. "What are these?" Gorsa replied, These are soul fragments I've specially collected, some from my old wizard tower, others after coming to the Sea of Sighs. He pointed to a faintly white strand on the second row. This one's from a half-elf, very cheap. I exchanged just a little magic for it. Then he pointed to another fragment on the third row. This one's from Prince Aruba of Kinas. Kira was too fierce. I only had time to collect this tiny bit. At the mention of Kira's name, a ripple passed through Yura's eyes, but it quickly vanished, replaced by a calm boring. Gorsa shook his head with a smile. No, not boring at all. He picked up the fourth bottle on the fourth row. The hair strand inside looked unremarkable, but the moment it was lifted, it began to twist and wriggle, trying to pierce through the container and enter Gorsa's fingertip. But the spherical flask lit up with a glow, blocking the gray wisp's attempt. Gorsa smiled even wider. Look how lively it is. Even as just a sliver, it still yearns for a body. This is my favorite soul fragment so far. It's a piece of Saul's soul, ripped off by those mouths when he mistakenly entered the candle ducts. By the time I got there, the mouth that devoured it had already mutated, but the soul fragment remained perfectly intact inside. This is Saul's soul. At Saul's name, a complicated expression appeared in Yura's previously drifting gaze. Yeah, do you know what the mouth mutated into? Without waiting for her to guess, Gorsa continued, every tiny lip seam grew eyes. Eyes sprouting from lips isn't terrifying on its own. But when Yura replayed Gorsa's words in her mind, her face suddenly turned to horror. You mean, the mouth mutated after devouring Saul's soul and grew eyes? Exactly, isn't it fascinating? A human soul can actually contaminate a wraith. Heh. Yura's expression darkened. Only wraiths can contaminate other wraiths. Not necessarily. Saul's consciousness was pure, unlike a wraith. Gorsa swirled the flask in his hand. The dull gray strand inside once again twisted toward his finger but was blocked again. The black tide and the stars can also contaminate wraiths. Yura couldn't make sense of it. What do you mean by that? This time, Gorsa didn't explain. I haven't figured it all out yet. I can't tell you. The next black tide is coming soon. I need to advance to the third rank again before then. He carefully returned Saul's soul fragment to the shelf. Deprived of Gorsa's touch, the soul fragment quieted down once more. Yura looked surprised. Didn't you already reach third rank? Gorsa shook his head, his platinum eyes narrowing. Last time was too rushed. I wasn't satisfied with the result. I need to take a different approach and do it again. That way, I might be able to resurrect you. But the moment Yura heard the word, resurrect, her entire body trembled violently. She shot her hands up to cover her ears and hunched over, screaming. Gorsa merely watched the suffering Yura calmly. Looks like the last contamination left you with quite a psychological shadow. He pressed a hand on top of her head, and Yura's body immediately froze in place. A moment later, Yura lowered her arms and looked up dazedly at the handsome man in front of her. Who are you? Gorsa smiled gently. I'm your lover. What? A few days later, Saul and his group arrived at the entrance to Hanging Hands Valley. Standing before the steeply sloping path once more, Saul's expression was complicated. To enter the borderland, we have to pass through Hanging Hands Valley. At this point, Saul was alone. All the other consciousness bodies had been sealed inside his diary. Even Penny had returned to her silver butterfly bookmark form, obediently pinned between two black pages. This time, as Saul passed through Hanging Hands Valley and entered the borderland on the other side, he needed to keep his mental fluctuations to a minimum. The mountain road was steep, normal carriages couldn't pass. But Saul had little algae. It emerged from the back of Saul's neck and crawled outside. First, it tied the carriage up tight, then shot out 8 tendrils that braced against the ground and lifted the entire carriage. From afar, it looked like a giant black spider. Then, with agile movements of its 8 legs, little Algae steadily carried the carriage down into the valley below. The entrance of Hanging Hands Valley was very clean. Saul spotted 2 apprentice corpses lying in the middle of the road. The corpses were already in an advanced state of decay, but the robes they wore remained pristine, likely needing a far longer time to begin breaking down. Despite the unsightly corpses, the valley's entrance was indeed clean. Saul narrowed his eyes and activated his meditation technique of the evolution diagram. He saw no soul bodies nearby. It seemed someone had deliberately cleared them out. "Let's go," Saul said as he put little Algae away and let Marsh resume driving. Marsh looked a bit nervous, though the mushroom on his head was squirming more excitedly than ever. "Don't worry. Though we'll be passing through Hanging Hands Valley, we'll avoid the most dangerous areas." Back during the Great Battle in Hanging Hands Valley, the most casualties had occurred in the central part of the valley. The 2 ends of the passage were relatively safer. Morden had lived in the valley for over 100 years. Although dazed through most of it, he still knew which places were more dangerous, where the terrifying wraiths and contamination were most concentrated. With Saul's current strength, as long as he didn't head straight into the densest areas, he shouldn't be in too much danger. If they encountered a small group of wraiths, he could deal with them alone. The horses pulling the carriage had their eyes covered and ears plugged, following only Marsh's reins for direction. But after the carriage had traveled deep into the canyon, Saul noticed that not a single wraith had appeared to cause trouble. Everything was quiet, so quiet it felt like they were traveling along a proper highway in the Kemiduchi. As the people inside the diary began to comment on how peaceful Hanging Hands Valley seemed, a corpse suddenly came into view, hanging from a cliff ahead. The cliff sloped outward, wider at the top than the bottom, so the corpse hung swaying in midair, with nothing to brace against. It hadn't been hanged. The rope had been driven straight through the skull, suspending the body. The blood that had flowed out long ago had turned a dark brown, soaking into the tattered robes. With a single glance, Saul could tell that a wraith was attached to the body. It was the first wraith he had seen since entering Hanging Hands Valley. Chapter 504, Welcome. Although the wraith before them didn't emit a particularly powerful aura, Saul remained vigilant, his entire being on high alert. The Battle of Hanging Hands Valley had taken place a century ago, yet too many wizards had perished here. The chaotic spirits, combined with the long years of suppression, had birthed a number of eerie and terrifying pollutants. However, just as Saul was about to cast a spell to strike first, Morden advised him not to attack the wraiths here unless absolutely necessary. Some wraiths might appear alone, but disturbing one could provoke a chain reaction. If they accidentally triggered a trap, things could get much more troublesome. Morden was an old hand in Hanging Hands Valley. Though he had long operated in the outer regions, he was powerful and knew more about this place than most. Taking Morden's advice, Saul re-examined the hanging corpse ahead. So far, it hadn't shown any signs of hostility. And the diary gave no warning. "Marsh, let's skirt around it by hugging the cliffside." The coachman nodded, cast another glance at the hanging corpse in midair, gulped nervously, and carefully guided the carriage to the right. Thankfully, the corpse made no objection to their detour and remained suspended over the left side of the cliff. But just as the carriage passed the corpse and began heading farther away, Saul, who had been staring at the corpse the entire time, was startled to realize it was still staring back at him. At some point, that rotting body had twisted ever so slightly. Its half-skeletal face was now turned toward Saul, as if afraid he might run away. As the carriage moved forward, the corpse continued to shift, rotating just a bit more, always keeping its gaze locked on Saul's position. "Has it set its sights on me?" Saul murmured. Even the powerful Morden felt uneasy at the sight. While he had been a second-rank wizard in life, his soul was now fragmented in death, and he was no longer among the strongest wraiths here. The ones closer to the borderland were far more powerful and far more contaminated. None of the other consciousnesses within the diary spoke. They knew there was little they could do here, so each of them kept quiet, not wishing to disturb the conversation between Morden and Saul. Morden, I'm not entirely sure, but we haven't provoked it, so it shouldn't have any reason to target us, right? Though the diary had issued no warning, Saul did not let down his guard. He instructed the coachman to pick up the pace slightly, splitting his attention between the path ahead and the receding corpse behind them. But just as the corpse was about to disappear from view, it suddenly raised both arms and began swinging them like a marionette. Its feet dangled, swaying side to side. "What's it doing?" Saul asked the consciousnesses in the diary to take a look at the corpse, and offered a cautious guess. "Is it dancing?" At first, none of them could make sense of it, but once the idea was planted, the rest of the men started to think and might be right. Thankfully, aside from dancing, the corpse did nothing else out of the ordinary. The carriage continued deeper into the valley. The cliffs on either side drew closer and closer until they encountered the head monsters. These creatures hid in crevices between rocks. If not for Saul maintaining a meditation technique, he might have missed their skin, which was the same color as stone, and their unnaturally pale eyes. The head creatures left a lasting impression on Saul. They had silently devoured several high-ranking apprentices. Even formidable ones like Billy and Wright had been unable to escape the head creatures' encirclement. "Herman, Morden, weren't you once the leader of these head creatures? Can you command them to retreat?" "Morden, if I could, I would. But the truth is, the power I used to control these monsters came from the pollution itself. Now that I've broken free from it, I've also lost my connection to the head creatures." Hearing this, Saul felt a tinge of disappointment, but he quickly pulled his thoughts back, reminding himself not to fall into old patterns of thinking. By now, the head creatures had drawn closer to the carriage. They moved with astonishing agility on their legless stumps, balancing their oversized heads as they encircled the group. Saul summoned the shadow spirit blade, ready to face them head-on, when suddenly one of the head creatures stopped a few meters away and appeared to start dancing. They bounced around Saul, hopping on one foot and then the other, like balls being slapped against the ground. But even though they surrounded Saul, they didn't block the path forward. In other words, Saul could still proceed through them. "Marsh." "Yes," Marsh replied, his voice full of caution. "Keep the carriage moving. Be careful not to fall into any of the holes in the ground," Saul instructed. Marsh nodded, stole a few glances at the head creatures with the corner of his eye, then quickly lowered his gaze. Drawing on years of experience, he calmed the horses and slowly urged the carriage forward. As they delved deeper into Hanging Hands Valley, the once smooth path grew barren and broken. The ground was dotted with pits and holes again. These were the same types of holes as those in the outer region of the valley, tunnels left behind by people searching for survivors or looting the belongings of the dead. As such, one still had to tread with extreme care. The head creatures weren't fazed by Saul's departure. They continued dancing in the place where he had once stood. Their thumping feet gradually formed a kind of rhythm. "Agu, are they dancing with the hanging corpse from earlier?" Saul recalled the motions of the corpse's dance, then looked at the jubilant head creatures on the ground. "Yes, the head creatures have no arms or legs, so their dancing is odd. They can only stomp their feet. But why would they be dancing at all?" Even after they left the head creatures behind, neither Saul nor his diary companions could figure out the purpose of the dance. But after the carriage had gone 100 meters or so, the rhythmic sounds behind them devolved into chaos. The dance became frantic and wild, nothing like the earlier harmony and elegance, and seemed to have a thought, but it only led to more confusion. And are they actually welcoming us? Herman, and you've got some imagination. And fell silent. The carriage continued its slow journey, and the pit-filled ground began to smooth out again. But now, from the depths of a few remaining holes, came the sound of flowing water. It seemed there was an underground river below. Clearly, this hidden river was no ordinary one. The horses, blindfolded, had been moving steadily, but for some reason they began to shake their heads, and soon enough they were flicking their tongues and stomping their hooves, dancing. The rhythm of their stomping was nearly identical to the earlier head creatures. Saul cast a stabilizing spell, and the horses calmed slightly. But before long, they suddenly bolted forward in a panic, heading straight for one of the holes. Saul raised his hand, preparing to cast a spell, when a giant human face suddenly appeared. The face was as large as the opening of the pit. As it rose, the hole became a flat surface, propping up the wheel and allowing the carriage to pass safely. As the wheels rolled over it, they left deep tracks across its face. But instead of being angry, the giant face broke into a wide grin. As its eerie laughter echoed through the valley, more and more faces emerged from the darkness below, covering the pit-riddled ground and forming a road for Saul's carriage. Agu murmured, "Could they really be welcoming us?" Chapter 505, The Eye of Banishment. Marsh struggled to control the horses. The horses used by wizards were different from ordinary ones. During breeding, their resistance to pollution was deliberately enhanced. But even such horses couldn't last long under the corrosion of wraiths and pollution. Marsh himself was becoming increasingly uncomfortable amidst the laughter. Even the mushroom atop his head was beginning to wilt. He could only try his best to speed up, not even caring if he trampled over the faces emerging from the ground. Saul sat inside the carriage, and little Algie had already crawled across the entire inner wall of the cabin. He listened as the laughter around him grew louder, only to be flung behind by the carriage. Saul leaned out of the window and saw that the road ahead no longer held any sinkholes, while the road behind was littered with echoes of laughter. Once the laughter was left far behind, both the tense little Algie and Marsh gradually returned to normal. Not long after, a massive crevice appeared on the mountainside ahead to their right, like someone had taken an axe and split the mountain straight down into the earth. The rift plunged deep into the mountain, its interior shrouded in darkness, its shape indiscernible. Yet as the carriage passed by, Saul could feel waves of intense mental energy emanating from within. There must be a large number of wraiths tangled up inside, and clearly not on the same level as the ones they'd encountered earlier on the road. "Morden, Master, do not go in." Saul gave a slight nod and instructed Marsh to pass by quickly. But as they moved past the rift, Saul still looked inward. This time, he didn't recklessly use his meditation technique, but instead observed the area around the rift with his naked eyes. He pulled out some paper and began noting down what he observed. There were clearly a great number of wraiths inside that rift, but they were all cowering in the deepest part. He had no idea what was restraining them. The carriage soon left the rift behind. Along the way, Saul passed several other clearly abnormal locations, but with Morden's guidance, they always managed to avoid the most dangerous places. "We're almost at the exit of the borderland," Saul said as he stepped out of the carriage, standing beside Marsh on the driver's platform. Marsh had been tense the entire ride. Now, even trying to open his mouth produced no sound. He could only nod heavily in response. "Agu, the borderland is a place without unified order. The rules for survival here are complicated. In this place, even a true wizard could face mortal danger, while certain special ordinary people might live on just fine." "Morden, In short, master, once you enter the borderland, no matter what you see, don't rush to approach. It's best to observe first, understand the patterns, and only then act. Observe and then identify the patterns, huh? Saul took their advice to heart. Suddenly, the mountains flanking the canyon vanished, as if they had been sliced clean through like blocks of tofu. Saul's carriage had finally exited Hanging Hands Valley and entered a new world. Saul had been standing atop the carriage as a precaution against danger, but what he saw caught him off guard. It was a wide, open grassland. Lush green grass, a gentle breeze. Sunlight, once blocked by the canyon walls of Hanging Hands Valley, now poured down unrestrained. So this is the borderland. Saul couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He squinted to examine the nearby area. The grass and plants swayed lightly, nothing unusual there. But when he gazed into the distance, he noticed a blur where the grassland met the blue sky. He carefully extended his mental form, spreading it slowly across the ground. But the feedback revealed nothing abnormal. The nearby area seems fine, but the farther regions, not so much. I can't yet tell where the boundary lies between normal and abnormal. Milord Marsh, finally free from the strangeness of Hanging Hands Valley, felt somewhat relieved at the sight of such beauty. He turned to Saul, uncertain where to go next. You wait here, don't wander off. If anything strange happens, retreat back into the valley. Marsh clearly thought the valley was scarier than this place, but he obeyed. Despite his lingering fear, he nodded. Understood, milord. Saul jumped down from the carriage and, after some thought, retrieved a magical artifact from his storage, one he had never used before. The Eye of Banishment. It was something Kanksha had given him before she died. She had told him that if Gorsa ever tried to harm his soul, he should swallow the Eye of Banishment. Though he would still die, at least he wouldn't suffer after death. At first, Saul had thought the diary's reason for urging him to accept Kanksha's invitation was just to obtain the Eye of Banishment. But later, during the Wizard Tower Rebellion, he never ended up using it. It was only then that he realized the diary's true goal in sending him to Elven Valley was likely to reveal the true nature of this planet to him, and to grant him the final gift of the half-elves, allowing him to ascend as a true wizard. If he hadn't achieved first-rank true wizard status, he likely wouldn't have survived long enough during the rebellion for Mentor Gorsa to suppress the pollution. But through later research, Saul discovered that the Eye of Banishment wasn't specifically designed to corrupt the soul. In fact, it had many uses. It could reveal the true flow of power, unclouded by illusion or interference. After disembarking, Saul lightly scored his left palm with the fingertip of his right hand, creating a shallow cut. A few strands of gray-glimmering blood trickled out. He pressed the Eye of Banishment against the wound. The seemingly unremarkable, just unusually hard, eye quickly merged with the cut. The bleeding stopped instantly. The eye rotated once in Saul's palm, and when the black pupil turned outward again, Saul felt as though he had lost all sensation in his palm. It was like someone had hollowed it out. Yet when he tried moving his fingers, they responded with perfect flexibility, no restriction at all. He raised his hand toward the distance and slowly extended his mental energy along his arm, connecting it bit by bit with the Eye of Banishment. Suddenly, Saul's vision gave a light shudder. An entirely new, third perspective emerged. When the black eye rotated of its own accord, he could even see himself from this unfamiliar viewpoint. And he wasn't alone. Through the Eye of Banishment's vision, Saul saw himself surrounded by a ring of multicolored auras. Even under the sunlight, those halos shone in stark, contrasting hues. They continuously shifted, like the air rippling above a blazing flame. Through the view from his left hand, Saul could clearly see these auras clinging close to him, occasionally shifting positions, moving near and then pulling back. He didn't yet know what they were, but he could feel them watching him. Saul narrowed his eyes, reining in his curiosity. He didn't turn to look directly. He flipped through the diary in his mind to the page where he first obtained the Eye of Banishment. The final line of that day's entry read, "Do not make eye contact with them. The cost of using the Eye of Banishment is seeing things I normally can't. Even though I can see them through the Eye of Banishment, I must not look at them directly." As he used the Eye of Banishment for longer, Saul's own vision began to faintly pick up colors not of this world. The Eye of Banishment observes the world, and also me. If those auras drift into my direct line of sight, I must be careful not to meet their gaze. Saul kept these insights in mind, warning himself what to be cautious of. Then he opened his left hand and stepped forward onto the grassland. Through the Eye of Banishment's vision, he saw that roughly 500 meters away, a village had suddenly appeared. Near the village, the green grass abruptly shifted to brown soil. The boundary between the two looked like mismatched puzzle pieces, connected, yet unnaturally so. Chapter 506, You Died. Although the borderland was full of danger, since Saul had chosen to settle here and build his wizard tower, he couldn't spend his life hiding. Besides, he had the dead wizard's diary. In a place where danger could descend at any time, he was the one with the greatest advantage. Let's observe first, Saul thought to himself, then stepped forward. He didn't intend to enter the village. He just wanted to get a little closer for a more careful observation. The village was very small and there were no walls built around it. From a distance, only one road could be seen running through it. Along that street, a number of squat gray buildings, 1 or 2 stories tall, stood in line. The closer they were to the street, the more intact and taller they seemed. There didn't appear to be many people on the street, but he could hear the faint sounds of conversation. A village that's normally invisible, yet visible to the Eye of Banishment. There's no way that's not suspicious. The side effects of the Eye of Banishment had grown worse. The iridescent aura around Saul shimmered more vividly with color. Out of the corner of his eye, Saul could now perceive some of those hues, even without relying on the Eye of Banishment. Suppressing the pain, Saul reached out and dug the Eye of Banishment out of his palm. In just this short time, several white tendril-like roots or nerve-like structures had already grown from the back of the eye, embedding 2 centimeters deep into Saul's flesh. Pinching his fingers together, Saul burned off the white growths before putting the Eye of Banishment back into its container. Even though the Eye of Banishment had been removed, the village before his eyes did not vanish. Apparently, once he discovered it, it could no longer hide. The diary hasn't issued a warning, so the danger level must not be. While thinking this, Saul took another 2 steps forward. But just as the thought crossed his mind that there had been no warning, the diary in his mental realm suddenly opened, its pages flipping with a whoosh to a brand new blank chapter. Lunar Calendar, Year 317, October 17. At the same time, you awake in the same bed. Put on the same clothes, greet the same people. Make the same jokes, receive the same teasing. And when night falls, as you climb into bed again, you'll feel the same confusion. This same life is the same kind of mundane. Likewise, you will not expect. This same place is also where you will rest in peace. Death warning. Saul's foot froze mid-step, and a few seconds later he withdrew it. This death warning doesn't include any clues for avoiding it, Saul muttered, stroking his chin, but didn't dwell on it for long. Herman, Master, what should we do now? We go around it. This village was nothing more than a roadside scene in his journey. Saul wasn't even a passing visitor to it. There was absolutely no need to proceed further after receiving a death warning from the diary. The borderland is full of dangers, but for now, I just need to find a relatively safe place to set up the wizard tower. Saul turned, ready to leave. Just as he turned around, a flatbed cart brushed past the front of his robes, speeding by. When did this cart appear behind me? Saul was startled, instantly stepping back 2 paces. Agu, we didn't notice when it showed up either. Oh, young man, I'm terribly sorry. I was lost in thought and didn't notice you standing in the middle of the road. The cart driver was dressed like an ordinary farmer, his face full of apologies. Saul said nothing. He hadn't sensed anyone approaching just now, let alone a whole cart, hitched with a horse, loaded with hay and bearing a metal pitchfork in the back. There was no way this guy was human. Saul's cold demeanor didn't deter the farmer. He kept talking. It's all my fault. I've been worrying about where little Claude went. He's been missing for so many days. Have you seen little Claude? The farmer looked at Saul with hope as he spoke. But Saul still ignored him, turning instead to glance back at his own cart. At that glance, Saul's expression darkened. The cart that had been only a few hundred meters away was now completely gone. He hadn't heard a sound of Marsh driving it away. Did I fall into some kind of illusion? Mordant illusions, that'll be troublesome. Hey, are you listening to me? The farmer ignored, stepped down from his cart and approached Saul. Have you seen little Claude? Red hair, big nose, about this tall, 10-year-old boy. Given his farmer's attire and the direction he'd come from, he was definitely tied to the village up ahead, having already decided not to enter the village. Saul ignored the farmer's question and turned to look for Marsh instead. After being ignored twice, the farmer's expression darkened. Why won't you answer me? Why are you leaving? Little Claude has been missing for so long, he must have been murdered. Was it you who killed him? Was it? Saul glanced back. The farmer's face was now completely twisted with rage. Gone was the apologetic man from before. He looked like a different person. There really is something wrong with this guy. Saul had no intention of tangling with these strange phenomena. He turned and walked away. Being ignored again, the farmer finally snapped. It was you who killed little Claude. It had to be you, he screamed, spinning around and yanking the pitchfork from the haystack, thrusting it viciously towards Saul's back. And master, he's attacking you, he. Saul, still facing away, raised a hand and flung a fireball backward. But before the fireball even touched the farmer, it suddenly vanished. Feeling his spell fail, Saul spun around in shock, only to be met with the pitchfork driving straight through his chest and abdomen. The sole armor that should have activated automatically failed to block it in the slightest. How is this possible? Saul gasped, blood spurting from his mouth as he stared at the farmer in disbelief. Master times 4. All 4 consciousnesses screamed in horror. Even now, the farmer looked just like an ordinary man. There wasn't the faintest trace of magical energy on him. The weakness from the fatal wound in his chest quickly spread throughout Saul's body. His powerful physical constitution as a wizard had completely failed him. New words appeared in the diary. You are going to die. Damn it, Saul couldn't believe it. He was actually going to die at the hands of an utterly unremarkable farmer. But he had no strength left. His body went limp. Wonderful, I've avenged little Claude, the farmer shouted gleefully, his expression returning to normal. With surprising strength, he half-lifted Saul and threw him onto the flatbed, then began piling hay over him. Saul was no different from a normal man now. He couldn't move at all. The pain in his chest was agonizingly real. He felt something heavy pressing on his left shoulder. Using the last bit of control he had over his eyeballs, he shifted his gaze. Through the dense hay, Saul saw a face. It was a child's face, full of youthful innocence, with short red hair and a big, bulbous nose. Little Claude, Saul exhaled weakly. And then, he could no longer resist the pull of his heavy eyelids. Darkness fell. Just before his consciousness faded, the diary once again filled with new writing. You died. What? Suddenly, a golden light cut through the darkness. As the light slowly faded, Saul's vision returned. Before him stood a very small village, with no enclosing walls. Only one road could be faintly seen running through it. No people in sight, but faint voices of conversation drifted through the air. Saul's face went pale. He stumbled backward again and again. Master times 4. The four consciousnesses cried out in unison. Eventually, Agu spoke on their behalf. Agu, Master, are you all right? Was all of that just an illusion? Saul lowered his head as the diary flew out and opened. The two lines that had just appeared, "You are going to die," and "You died," were still on the white page, but now they were both crossed out. Erased. What was that? Did I really just die once? That golden light, was it? A thought struck Saul. He quickly had the diary flip ahead, all the way to the golden pages. He now had 2 golden pages. And now, a new line drawing had appeared on the first golden page. In the illustration, Saul lay in a haystack, 3 gaping holes in his chest pouring blood. His eyes were half closed. He looked completely dead. In the corner of the image, another face could just barely be seen. Because the drawing was done in black ink lines, it was impossible to tell the hair color, but the nose was comically large. The golden page has finally made its appearance. Chapter 507, Resurrection, Rewind. Saul lowered his head and stared at the diary, still not fully recovered from the death he had just experienced. What just happened? Could it be that the golden page's function is resurrection? The dead wizard's diary, capable of resurrecting a wizard. That kind of makes sense. Just as Saul was inspecting the diary, a carriage brushed past his arm. Saul looked up, and the moment he saw the passing cart, his pupils shrank sharply. A plainly dressed farmer was driving a flatbed wagon piled high with straw. Sticking out from the top of the pile was a pitchfork. "Whoa!" The farmer pulled the reins and halted the cart. He turned around and apologized to Saul. "Sorry, young man. I was lost in thought and nearly hit you." Saul stared at the farmer. He didn't say a word. He simply raised a hand, then brought it down. A black shadow blade silently formed behind the farmer and in one swift stroke, cleaved his head clean off. The farmer had been sitting. His head rolled from his shoulders and hit the ground, while a fountain of blood sprayed from his neck, quickly splattering the straw behind him. It's not resurrection, it's a reset. Saul walked forward cautiously and examined the farmer's corpse. Dead, very dead. Why wasn't he afraid of my spell the first time? Does Dark Spirit Blade actually work in this illusion-like space? Saul had ambushed the farmer. If the sneak attack had been blocked by some mysterious power, it would have meant the farmer never even noticed it had happened. But to Saul's surprise, the Dark Spirit Blade worked perfectly, cleanly severing the man's neck. After confirming the farmer was indeed dead, Saul walked to the back of the straw pile and pulled out the pitchfork. "Who dares commit murder in front of us?" 2 burly men appeared at the village entrance, seemingly out of nowhere. They were dressed a bit better than the farmer, with short swords at their waists and sturdy boots on their feet. They looked like village guards. Both men had drawn their swords and were sprinting towards Saul. Saul casually flicked his wrist, and the Dark Spirit Blade split into 2, shooting toward the guards. Meanwhile, Saul used the pitchfork to lift the straw, searching for the body of the brother who had once lain beside him. But after turning the whole straw stack upside down, he found no corpse, not even a severed head. "Herman, strange. Where's the corpse of that red-haired boy? And Master, look over there." Saul turned his head. The 2 guards were both completely unharmed. It was as if the Dark Spirit Blade had never struck them. They were now only 50 meters away. The spell had failed again. Saul immediately turned, pitchfork in hand, and braced himself. One of the guards suddenly threw his short sword at Saul. It was a reckless move. He had no backup weapon and threw away his only iron blade. But his aim isn't bad. Watching the blade sail toward him, Saul raised the pitchfork to deflect it. But the moment metal met metal, the pitchfork was sliced cleanly in half like tofu. Saul failed to block it. He instantly tried to retreat, but the next second, the sword accelerated midair and in the blink of an eye pierced through his abdomen, blade and hilt. Can't block it, can't dodge it. The stabbing pain engulfed Saul, and he immediately lost control of his body. He collapsed to the ground, limp and helpless, but this time he wasn't dead, not yet. The two guards rushed up. "He killed Uncle John," one of them said, grief-stricken. "Someone this vicious. Maybe he's responsible for little Claude's disappearance too." "I say he's definitely the one who killed little Claude." "Yeah, let's lock him in the cellar and wait for the village chief to decide." "But the chief is so soft-hearted, what if he spares him?" The other guard suddenly slashed Saul's neck. "Don't worry. Now, even if the chief gets soft, he won't be able to spare him. We've finally found the one who killed little Claude. The village can stop living in fear." So ruthless, Saul thought, unable to move, enduring the pain in silence. With his willpower, he could have taken 3 more stabs and still stood back up. But in this strange place, just one wound sent him into a near-death state. All he could do was blink. Agu worried. Could this be some kind of worldside where death always triggers a rewind? And unimpressed, then this worldside must be really bored, wasting all that energy. The two guards hauled the cart back, now carrying both the dead farmer and the dying Saul. Once again, Saul shared the flatbed ride with the farmer. But this time, the diary only gave a warning after they reached the cellar near the village entrance. "You are about to die from blood loss. Here it comes." The death warning. The two guards unceremoniously threw Saul into the cellar, slamming him hard against the ground. Then they locked the cellar door and disappeared. Saul figured they went to get the village chief, but they'd surely stall, ensuring Saul would be dead before the soft-hearted chief arrived. And he was indeed dying fast. With his vision going black from blood loss, he weakly turned his head and saw a pair of wide, staring eyes. They belonged to someone hiding inside a large wooden crate. The head was upside down. Only the eyes and a tuft of red hair beneath them were visible. Red hair. Saul widened his eyes, trying to get a clearer look. The person's nose was obscured by the crate lid. But even with only part of the face showing, Saul was convinced. It was the red-haired, big-nosed little Claude the farmer had said had gone missing days ago. Had the boy been hiding here all along? No, that can't be right. Saul's mind was foggy, and thoughts crawled slowly. If it's this angle, then little Claude must be curled up head first in the box, or maybe it's just a head. Darkness swallowed Saul's vision once more. "You have died." What? Saul opened his eyes again, finding himself outside the village. "Herman, master, the rules here are too twisted. Let's turn around and leave immediately." Saul looked back. As expected, there was no marsh or carriage behind him. No, the moment I stepped into a certain boundary, escape was no longer an option. He wasn't panicked. Instead, he immediately summoned the diary and flipped to the golden page. He was now certain the diary would save him, but he didn't know what each rescue cost. If he had already died twice, did that mean he had used up 2 golden pages? Saul grimaced in pain at the thought. But fortunately, the price wasn't so high. Only the first golden page had changed. The image had shifted, from Saul dead in the straw pile to Saul dead in the cellar. In the drawing, even in death, he was staring at the crate in the cellar corner. Saul closed the diary and nodded slightly to himself. So it's not this bizarre village that rewinds time, it's the diary. But that still doesn't explain why the corpse in the straw pile ended up in the cellar the second time. And also, here's something odd. At first, they all said little Claude had gone missing, but suddenly they started insisting he was dead and believed it completely. Agu finally peeking out from behind the book where it had been blocking his view. Right, I was going to say that too. And the farmer's strength was different between the two encounters. That could be due to some rule. Master, you need to be careful. Saul nodded. Yeah, I've been thinking about that too. Why can't I attack them? Is it that I have to ambush them? He had ambushed the farmer the second time. But it didn't feel that simple. Just then, another flatbed cart brushed past his arm. But poor Saul. It's been a long time since he's been this miserable. Chapter 508, Killing Intent. The third time he saw the farmer, the man was still just as warm and apologetic, once again asking Saul if he had seen a 10-year-old boy with red hair and a big nose. This time Saul looked at the farmer steadily and smiled. Sorry, I haven't seen that boy. The farmer looked disappointed, but he no longer suspected Saul of being the culprit. It's getting late. You're standing out here. How about I take you into the village and let you rest for the night? Saul agreed readily. Sure, thank you. The farmer beamed. It's been a long time since we had an outsider visit the village. Get in the cart, just sit on the straw, it's soft, don't worry about crushing it. Saul climbed into the cart, and while sitting down, deliberately adjusted the seat cushion as a pretext to move the straw around a bit. Once again, there were no corpses hidden in the straw. The cart clattered into the small village. As they passed a house on the outermost edge, Saul saw two burly men standing under the eaves. They were holding short blades, precisely the two guards who had killed Saul the second time. But this time, when they saw the farmer and Saul sitting on the cart, they only glanced over casually and then retreated into the shadows under the eaves, continuing their conversation. The farmer's house wasn't right by the main road at the village center, but had to be reached through a narrow path between two rundown houses. Still, it was a two-story house, already considered quite fancy among the small outer buildings. The farmer stopped the cart at the door and invited Saul inside. The door was bolted from within, and the farmer couldn't push it open. Must be my wife locking the door again. Normally, I'd be out delivering straw at this hour, but I figured you'd be hungry, so I came back early, the farmer said with a smile, then raised his rough hands and knocked on the door. Coming, coming, came a slightly panicked voice from inside, followed by hurried footsteps on the stairs. The bolt was pulled back, the door opened, and a slightly plump middle-aged farmwife with a headscarf appeared. Why are you back so early today? What took you so long? They spoke at the same time, both with a hint of impatience in their tone. The wife was the first to step aside. I was upstairs tidying up. I heard the noise and came right down. How is that slow? But the farmer wasn't satisfied. I finally brought a guest over and you locked the door. Go bring out dinner to treat our guest. The wife gave Saul a glance, still looking somewhat flustered. The farmer urged her again before she turned and went into a small room on the left to prepare the meal. But just after she left, the farmer suddenly looked suspiciously toward the second floor. I'll go grab a bottle of wine upstairs. Saul wanted to say it wasn't necessary, but he knew the farmer's talk of wine was just an excuse. The farmer quickly bounded up the stairs in a few strides, just as the farmwife came out carrying bowls and silverware. Seeing the farmer heading upstairs, she was startled. What are you going up there for? The farmer ignored her. The farmwife followed him a few steps but ultimately stopped at the base of the stairs. Don't go messing up the storeroom again, she said as she placed the tableware on the table in the living room. Her hands were trembling. She was clearly very nervous. Suddenly, a scream rang out from the second floor, followed by chaos. Then Saul saw a shadow fall past the window beside him. Saul stepped closer and saw a young man lying on the ground with a familiar iron fork stabbed into his neck. Before Saul could even marvel at yet another domestic tragedy, a venomous voice sounded behind him. "This is all your fault." Saul turned around and saw the farm wife rushing at him, with a sharp dining fork raised in her hand. "This is my fault." Saul, who already knew these villagers weren't normal, immediately activated his magic. "If you hadn't come here, he wouldn't have come home early." A black blade appeared behind the farm wife. But when it fell, it was still blocked by an invisible barrier. So it's not just about whether you ambush them or not. Saul already knew how this attempt would end, but he still tried to leap through the window and escape. However, just as he made up his mind to flee, the farm wife, who had been 2 or 3 meters away, suddenly appeared in front of him in the blink of an eye and drove the fork into his eye, the tip stabbing straight through his brain. "So, Herman, that just looks painful." Saul thought he would die instantly, but instead, he remained conscious for several more seconds. In that time, he saw the farm wife dragging him by the leg into the small room to the left. It was the kitchen. As soon as they entered, Saul saw the stove. The farm wife grabbed Saul's head and lifted it. Saul then saw what was in the stove. A pot of thick, bubbling soup of indiscernible ingredients, with several strands of red hair floating on top. Perfect timing. The old broth needed replacing anyway. The farm wife muttered as she grabbed a knife from the counter and brought it down with force. "You are now well cooked." "What?" Saul, she still had the mood to cook. Shouldn't she have waited to kill or be killed by the farmer? Agu, probably because everyone in this village is messed up. Standing once more outside the village, Saul didn't bother watching the Golden Pages illustration this time. Even he couldn't bear to look at the scene again. The other consciousnesses likewise avoided bringing it up. "Morden, Master, this is already the 4th restart. Have you noticed any loss of mental or magical energy?" Saul knew what Morden was worried about. "I've checked my physical state every time I started over. So far, I haven't lost anything." "Agu, no cost at all. That's terrifying." "Herman, why is it terrifying if there's no cost?" "Because the most expensive things are always the ones that come free." "But that's not what matters right now," Saul replied. Then he stood where he was, waiting for the farmer's cart to pass by again. Events proceeded just as they had the 3rd time. Saul accepted the farmer's invitation to enter the village. On the way, he thought about the ways he'd died the previous 3 times. "Each time I died, it was when someone wanted to kill me." "Morden, I noticed that too. Maybe the rule here is that you can't resist someone who harbors killing intent." "Possibly. I only struck out in the 2nd round, killed the farmer. That was right after dying the 1st time, and I naturally developed a killing intent toward him." But after a moment's thought, Saul shook his head. "But I also felt killing intent toward others when they attacked me, and I still couldn't hurt them. And we've seen now that ambushes don't work either. So maybe killing intent alone isn't enough. But I'm fairly sure that once someone harbors killing intent toward me, I'm dead." "Herman, trying to make sure no one in this place wants to kill you. That's impossible. These people are clearly all insane." Saul clasped his fingers together. "I've got a new idea." Just then the farmer pulled up in front of his home. "This is my house. Want to come in for the night?" Saul hopped off the cart and brushed off the bits of straw and pine needles. "Thanks, but I'd like to walk around the street a bit first. Pick up a few things." The farmer frowned. "Then be careful. Little Claude just went missing a few days ago. The bad guy might still be in the village." Saul nodded. "This time I'll be careful." He walked away from the farmer, who didn't head home right away but went off to make deliveries. Saul watched the cart pull away and glanced up at the 2nd floor of the farmer's house. He said nothing and moved on. "Can you give me a silver coin?" As he walked down the street, a cute little girl about 7 or 8 years old suddenly blocked his path. Given how easily people here turn to murder, Saul didn't let his guard down just because she was young. "Can I ask why you want a silver coin?" "My friend little Claude has been missing for days. I need the coin to hire a cart and go look for him." The little girl puffed out her chest, speaking with conviction. Chapter 509. The one who strikes first survives. Because her best friend had been missing for many days, she randomly asked a stranger on the street for money to look for him. That line of thinking was certainly unconventional. Still, considering that refusing might upset the little girl, Saul reached into his pocket. Just as Saul was about to use the motion of reaching into his pocket as cover to retrieve a silver coin from his storage device, he suddenly noticed a woman storming over angrily from not far away. Saul raised an eyebrow and promptly pulled out his completely empty pocket, then said to the little girl, "I'm really sorry. I'd love to help, but I don't have a single silver coin." Seeing that Saul took nothing out, the furious expression on the woman's face eased. The little girl, her hope rising and then dashed, puffed up her cheeks. "You're already so big, how can you still not have money? Useless adult." The woman behind her reached out and knocked the girl on the head. Thud. The sound was extremely loud. "Why are you asking strangers for money? What if you run off after borrowing money and go missing like little Claude did?" "I'm sorry, Mom." The little girl clutched her head, not daring to argue, but she shot Saul a venomous glare. Saul immediately bent down and gently patted her head. "How about this? You're still young and it's not safe to go out alone. I'll help you find little Claude." The girl lit up instantly. "Little Claude is my best friend. You have to find him." Saul nodded earnestly. "But before that, I need to know more about him. What kind of person he is and where he might be." The girl jumped up and said, "Little Claude is super mischievous. He loves playing hide-and-seek with me. He'll hide anywhere just to make me look for him." Her mother clearly had a different opinion about little Claude. "He's nothing but a liar. He said he could make the big trees obey his commands and even transform into the village chief. I bet he was just pretending to be the chief and got thrown in jail by the real one." As the woman spoke, her expression darkened. "Maybe he was locked up and killed." Saul smoothly changed the subject. "Where's the village chief's house?" The woman pointed to the most beautiful white house at the end of the main road. "Right there." Saul immediately excused himself and walked toward the chief's house. Knock, knock, knock. He rapped on the door of the White House. Ding-a-ling-a-ling, a series of crisp, pleasant chimes rang out. Soon the door opened. But when Saul saw the person who answered, he froze. Herman, this guy. The man had messy red hair and a huge nose, which made his eyes and mouth look tiny in contrast. But unlike little Claude, this man looked to be in his 30s. He was clearly not a child. "Hello, I'd like to speak to the village chief." The man gave a gentle smile. "That would be me, I'm Big Claude." Saul knew some places used prefixes like big and little to distinguish between people with the same name, but these two looked a little too similar. Saul tested the waters. "I heard little Claude went missing, so I came to look for him. May I ask what's your relationship with him?" Big Claude sighed. "I'm his older brother." Quite an age gap for siblings. "Do you know how little Claude went missing?" Saul continued. "Come inside." Big Claude invited Saul in. "I'm not really sure why he disappeared, but I was probably the last person to see him." The village chief was cleanly dressed and carried himself with a refinement uncharacteristic of someone from a small village. A wizard passed through today. He noticed little Claude's talent and wanted to take him on as an apprentice, but little Claude refused. I was afraid the wizard would get angry, so I scolded him. Then he suddenly ran off. He hasn't come back. I've searched everywhere but found nothing. Just as he finished speaking, Big Claude noticed Saul staring straight at him. What is it? When exactly did little Claude go missing? This morning. If you want an exact time, it was around 10 a.m. The man clearly didn't catch Saul's implication and even paused to think carefully. Agu, this village chief, is suspicious. Everyone else says little Claude has been missing for days, but he claims it happened today. And what if Big Claude is little Claude? Maybe that's why he doesn't know he's gone missing. Agu, but he's the village chief. Others still recognize the chief hasn't disappeared. It might not be that complicated, Saul murmured. What was that? Big Claude didn't catch it. Suddenly, a black blade appeared behind the village chief, and in a flash sliced through his neck. Herman and the other three. Saul stood up, dragged the chief's corpse to a corner out of view from the window, and then calmly walked out the door. The village chief's memory of Claude's disappearance contradicts everyone else. Maybe that's because the chief died before the others did. Back on the street, Saul hadn't gone far before he spotted the peasant woman who once killed him walking out cheerfully. At the same time, a young man climbed out of a window and slipped between two houses. Saul recognized him at once. It was the same man who had been skewered by a farmer's pitchfork and fallen from the second floor. Saul followed the man into the gap between the buildings. The man seemed to sense someone behind him, but before he could turn around, a black blade sliced off his head. Moments later, Saul emerged and knocked on the neighboring door. "You're back," the farmer man looked pleased to see Saul. "My wife just went out to buy soup stock. Once she returns, you'll get to taste a delicious stew." Saul smiled and thanked him, entering the house. A few minutes later, the farmer's wife returned, only to find Saul sitting alone in the living room. She looked at the unfamiliar face with suspicion, but quickly recalled something. "Hello there, young man. You must be the guest my husband invited. Where is he?" Saul stood. "Yes, ma'am, hello, Mr. John went upstairs." "Oh dear," the farmer's wife covered her face with a laugh, clearly not flustered at all. "Don't call me ma'am. You look barely out of your teens, just call me auntie." She laughed and turned toward the kitchen to start preparing soup. Saul followed. "What kind of soup are you making, auntie?" The farmer's wife reached the stove and lifted the lid. "We country folk don't have fancy ingredients, just some discarded bones others didn't want." Thunk. Splash. Before she could finish her sentence, her head dropped into the soup pot. Saul stepped out of the kitchen and gently closed the door behind him. He glanced at the stairway closet, now leaking red fluid, and quietly exited the farmer's house. When Saul first suddenly killed the village chief Big Claude, the four consciousnesses had only been shocked. Now, they were utterly silent. From then on, Saul's black blade transformed into the scythe of death. Whenever he saw someone alone, he didn't bother speaking. He simply killed them. When facing 2 or 3 people together, he split his black blade into multiple parts, striking all at once. He never gave anyone the chance to raise killing intent. And on this bloody road, Saul's mastery of the dark spirit blade became more fluid and natural. He could now split the blade into dozens of separate parts. Harvesting lives felt completely different from simply practicing magic. He could feel the feedback as soul bodies were ripped apart. This allowed the dark spirit blade, already a dark element spell, to progress rapidly. By the time Saul reached the outskirts of the village, he saw 2 guards chatting idly under a small hut. 2 shadows silently appeared behind their necks. The shadows flashed, and both headless bodies crumpled to the ground. Saul slowly walked out of the village. "If I kill everyone here, no one will have the chance to form a killing intent toward me again." He left the final house and stood at the end of the village's only street, looking back at the now silent place. So the rule here is, whoever strikes first survives. Chapter 510, The Golden Pay. Morden, such an overbearing law. Is this the so-called borderland? Agu seemed to know a bit more about the borderland, perhaps because he had been here when he was alive. Agu, no, even in the borderland, places like this are rare. The village itself isn't terrifying. What's truly frightening is its ability to force even outsiders to obey its rules. While the group was still discussing, a new sound came from the village before Saul's eyes. From the haystack on the cart, the large pot in the kitchen, the wooden crate in the cellar, the tree hole in a giant tree, one by one, red-haired, big-nosed boys crawled out. Some were covered in blood, some were missing body parts, some had their skin torn open, and some could only carry their heads in their hands. They walked, crawled, or rolled their way to Saul. Despite looking more horrifying and pitiful one after another, every boy had clear eyes, utterly free of malice. They stopped 10 meters away from Saul and spoke in unison. "My name is Little Claude. I went missing. Each and every one of them killed me." As their voices fell, Saul saw the world around him freeze, like time had stopped. Heaven and earth turned golden. Then this golden hue withdrew from the environment and condensed into a single golden page. On the page was a drawing of a small village, clearly populated by many people, and every single one of them was killing someone. The golden page landed in Saul's hand. Holding it with one hand and staring at the content, Saul suddenly understood. The function of the golden page isn't resurrection, nor time reversal. The reason it lets me redo things over and over is because, like the white page, it can foresee the future. In other words, the golden page hadn't deviated from the basic function of the Death Wizard's diary. It still foresaw death and destiny. But it was far more powerful than the white page. The white page could only offer Saul ambiguous words, requiring him to analyze and deduce a path to survival. But the golden page could construct a micro-world within Saul's consciousness, a world where every reaction mirrored the real one. Thus, Saul could try out responses in person to seek a way to survive. This was why Saul had been able to revive 3 times without paying any price. Because the cost had been paid by the golden page. And the golden page's ability to pay that cost came from the process of its creation. The golden page had once been just a seed of origin, planted in a turbulent era where both personal and collective fates had drastically shifted. It had absorbed the twisted fates of countless people, drawn out countless visible yet untouchable lines of destiny, and finally, woven and fixed these lines into a golden page through the diary's power. Weaving a page required vast numbers of fate threads. Only deeply twisted fates, lives of great suffering, and worlds of complex upheaval could provide enough fate threads. Otherwise, forming a complete page might take hundreds or even thousands of years. That was why Kismet had been stirring chaos behind the scenes, inciting trouble everywhere, accelerating the diary's page-weaving process. Only exceptionally unique fate threads could give birth to a golden page. Take the page in Saul's hand, for example. It came from Ralph Manor, but the seed had been planted during the Bloodrose family's era. Spanning over a century, entwining the fates of thousands, the end result was the page in Saul's hand. Having finally experienced the golden page in full and grasped its fundamental principle, Saul let go, allowing the page to merge into his body. The golden world around him melted like snow, returning to its full, colorful vibrance. Saul once again looked at the white page of the diary. All the words documenting his multiple deaths had disappeared. Even the diary's reactions can be simulated inside the golden page's world. Saul chuckled, turning just in time to see a flatbed cart hauling straw pass by him. The farmer driving it quickly stopped and looked back apologetically. "Oh, young man, so sorry, I zoned out for a second and didn't notice you standing in the middle of the road." Saul smiled again and calmly walked forward, but this time, his approach had changed. "I'm a wizard," He raised his hand, a small fireball dancing in his palm. The farmer, John, widened his eyes at the sight of the flame. He scrambled off the cart and dropped to his knees. "Oh, great wizard, my lord!" Saul lifted him with mage hand. "I want to select apprentices from your village. Can you take me to your village chief?" Even after revealing his identity as a wizard, Saul remained courteous. From the village chief's earlier words, Saul could tell these villagers revered wizards just like those in the outside world. But considering how easily they turned to killing, they might still attack Saul out of fear or panic. The farmer, flustered by the gesture, said, "I'll take you to the chief." Saul nodded but didn't get on the cart. Instead, he flew. The flying figure stunned the two guards at the village entrance. But since Saul hadn't shown hostility, they remained cautious yet non-violent. Eventually, Saul arrived at the village chief's home and once again saw Big Claude, the man who looked exactly like Little Claude. By now, quite a few villagers had followed behind him. The farmer explained the situation, and Big Claude nervously asked, "The wizard wishes to select apprentices. I'll summon all the village's children at once." But Saul said, "Age doesn't matter when I take on apprentices. Bring everyone in the village." "No age limit." Big Claude was stunned, but upon seeing Saul's firm gaze, he nodded and agreed. In a large city, gathering everyone would have been difficult, but this was a tiny, abnormal village with only a dozen households. As they waited, Big Claude nervously approached. "Wizard, my younger brother Little Claude ran out earlier and hasn't come back. He might not be in the crowd." Saul's expression didn't change. "That's fine, I'll find him." Big Claude was momentarily taken aback, his face filled with joy and puzzlement. Before long, everyone had arrived. The entire population of this small village added up to fewer than 100. Saul looked at their confused, nervous, yet excited faces. Then he confirmed not a single one was missing. He stood up and flew to the roof of the village chief's house. That movement alone stirred the villagers into admiration and awe. They gasped in wonder. But beneath their amazement, Saul detected hints of fanaticism and greed. He could tell, even though his identity as a wizard had temporarily suppressed them, these twisted villagers would soon let their fear morph into another kind of extremity. Saul could already hear their breathing grow heavier. Yet he spoke slowly and calmly. "Mr. Claude, will you come out now? Or shall I kill everyone here to make you show yourself?" Before anyone could respond, Saul's eyes narrowed, his pupils instantly bloodshot. In that instant, every villager had a blade the size of a fingernail silently stabbed into the back of their heads. And if the blade moved forward even the slightest bit more, it would pierce straight into their brainstems. The entire time, Saul had spoken in the Noah tongue, the language of wizards, with a gentle smile on his face. Meanwhile, the villagers below, utterly oblivious, continued to gaze up at the rooftop in awe. They didn't know that this time, Saul had already formed the intent to kill. Chapter 511, Curse. The farmers below had no idea what had just happened. They craned their necks upward, waiting for the verdict. "Herman, master, is Little Claude really not dead? But then why would he show up for the sake of these people who keep trying to kill him?" Saul wasn't in a hurry, because these people are not alive. Herman still didn't understand. But before he could ask more, the one standing closest, Village Chief Claude, let out a long sigh. The moment the sigh fell, the other villagers instantly froze. It was as if, aside from Saul and the village chief, time had stopped for everyone else. "You're the first wizard to see through the truth the moment you arrived. But no matter how I look at you, you're only first rank. Are you hiding your strength?" The one behind the scenes had finally revealed himself. Saul crouched down, looking down at Claude. In his eyes, the tall, red-haired middle-aged man was covered in scars. The skin on his face was pitted and uneven, as if it had been scalded in boiling water. A circular scar ringed his neck, like he had once been beheaded. The tips of his fingers were badly worn, nails gone, as though he had fiercely clawed at something. And under the clothes covering Claude's body, there were surely even more terrifying wounds. This Claude, this wizard, looked as though he'd been killed dozens, if not hundreds of times. "My strength doesn't matter," Saul said slowly. "What matters is, if you keep going like this, you're going to mutate." Claude wasn't surprised. Clearly, he was well aware of his own condition. "You've already broken the deadlock of this village. You should leave now. In a little while, the rules here will reset. If you already understand the basic formula, no matter how much the situation shifts, it won't deviate from its principle," Saul replied with a smile. "But are you really content to collapse in this endless cycle of chaos? Didn't expect to meet such a good man in the borderland." "I'm no good man," Saul denied. "I just like equivalent exchange." Claude laughed, and when he did, his mouth didn't just crack open vertically. It split horizontally too. "I can guess what you're after, but what makes you think you can pay the price?" "This." A translucent tendril whipped out from Saul's palm, suddenly curling around the frozen little girl. Claude glanced at her but didn't move. "You can't destroy them." He thought Saul was threatening him with the villagers, but to his surprise, Saul released the girl in the next second. The little girl, who had just moments ago worn an eerie smile, now returned to a peaceful expression. Her eyes closed, she lay on the ground as if asleep. Claude's casual expression vanished. He rushed to the girl's side and examined her condition. A moment later, he looked up with astonishment. "You actually managed to purge the pollution from her without damaging the soul itself." It was like dropping a drop of ink into clear water, and then removing the ink without disturbing the water's shape. Claude could remove ink from water, but not pollution from a soul. He laid the girl down gently and brushed aside her bangs. "Morden, seems like he doesn't care as little about the villagers as he pretends. Agu, on the contrary, he cares deeply, even if they're already the living dead. And Master is amazing. He saw right through Claude's true feelings." Herman Huy. Even Saul was a bit surprised by how much Claude cared for the girl. When he used soul fishing on the villagers, he only drained a large portion of their pollution. Besides probing Claude's reaction, his main purpose had been to make it clear he had the power to cleanse Claude's corrupted soul body. But what he didn't expect was that Claude seemed to care more about the villagers' pollution, and didn't immediately realize that this method could be used on himself. As Claude stood up again, the cold indifference on his face was gone. "What's the price to learn how to purge pollution like you?" "You won't be able to learn it," Saul jumped down from the roof. "But you can trade with me, the principles behind the formation of this village's rules, in exchange for my help." "So that's what you're after," Claude blinked, clearly having misjudged Saul's intent. He looked down at the little girl, then came to a decision. "As for how the rules were formed, I can only say I don't know." Saul frowned, but he could tell Claude had more to say, so he remained silent. "Seems like you haven't been in the borderland for long, or you wouldn't have asked. In the outside world, whether it's Stat or the other two continents, pollution follows patterns. But in the borderland, it's different. Pollution comes from nowhere. One moment you're conducting your usual research, and the next, the potion in your hand suddenly jumps onto your face and tries to burrow in. Even your own body parts might suddenly mutate." As Claude said this, a few villagers suddenly twitched. He pulled a milky white shell wind chime from his pocket and gave it a light shake. The villagers, who had shown signs of waking up, immediately froze in place again. "This village, one day it just developed this rule, kill and you die. It's not uncommon in the borderland, but no one knows why, at least not yet. Still, though I don't know the cause, I can tell you everything that's happened here. Maybe, one day, you'll figure it out on your own. Go on, Saul said, not committing to anything yet. This is the village I was born in, Claude said, eyes downcast. It used to be a bit bigger than this. One day I was fetching water by the river, and a wizard suddenly appeared before me, saying I had the potential to be his apprentice. He could make fish leap from the riverbank on their own, and birds from the sky would help carry my water buckets. I thought it was incredible, so I agreed. But when I brought him home to meet my brother refused no matter what. He even offered up all the money we had, begging the wizard to leave me alone. I was only 10 then. I didn't understand what my brother meant. I thought he just didn't want me to leave and leave all the work to him, and I was upset. So when the wizard asked me again, in front of my brother, if I wanted to be his apprentice, I still said yes. Then the wizard killed my brother. Saul cupped his chin, not unexpected. I was too stunned to react at the time. It was only after being taken away that I started crying. The wizard wanted to teach me runes, but I was too grief-stricken and scared to learn. He asked me if I thought he was a bad person. I didn't dare admit it, but in my heart I did think so. Then he brought me back to the village. But he didn't bring me back to let me go. He wanted me to understand that this village had no good people either. At that, Saul looked at the eerie villagers lying on the ground and began to get a sense of something. Claude went on. He told me that killing was an ordinary thing. I didn't believe him, so he flew me into the sky. And then I saw it with my own eyes, how the kind farmer would come home every day with a corpse hidden in his haystack, how the honest housewife would sneak other men into her home when the farmer was out. Some of those men left, others ended up in the stove. The little girl I liked most was stuffed into a tree hole by her own mother. And her mother kept calling her home for dinner every day. After seeing all that, my fear turned to numbness. I followed the wizard back and started learning obediently. I only came to understand, once I reached 3rd rank, that the reason my village became so twisted was because that wizard had cast a curse. Chapter 512. This is the borderland. A droplet of rain landed on Saul's face. He looked up and realized it had begun to rain. It wasn't even noon yet. The sun was still hanging high in the sky, but at some point a heavy cloud had drifted overhead. Below, Claude's story was nearing its end. That incident became a nightmare I can never forget. Later, after I finally advanced to a true wizard, I left that wizard and returned to my old village. To escape the nightmare, I remade all the dead villagers and brought them here, using the dream bell. Claude raised the shell wind chime in his hand. It was a magical tool given to me by that wizard, my current mentor. It can control the corpses of the villagers, making them appear as if they were still alive. But one day, the villagers here started gaining a will of their own. What's even more terrifying is, Claude looked at Saul. They acted exactly like how I remembered them, but their personalities became disturbingly extreme. One wrong word and they'd kill. You don't know when the villagers came to life. Claude shook his head. I didn't dig too deep. In the borderland, strange things can happen at any time, but within 2 years something else changed. A new rule appeared in the village. Whoever strikes first will kill the one who strikes later. How did you discover this rule? Saul asked. Surely Claude didn't have a golden page like his, one that allowed multiple virtual death simulations. Because I've been killed in this village countless times, Claude said, tilting his head back. The deep, severed scar on his neck was glaringly visible. Herman, could it be that he can't die in this village? And, more like he just can't be killed by these eerie villagers. Otherwise, why do you think he walked out of there alive? Wasn't it because the master's dark spirit blade was at his nape? Morden, he looks like an ordinary 1st rank. If the master hadn't helped him today, HMPH, he wouldn't live much longer anyway. The master saying it's an even exchange already gave him too much credit. He should be begging the master instead. While listening to Claude's story, Saul also glanced at the discussion among the consciousnesses in the diary. So basically, although you're still alive, you've already become part of this village's rules. Like the other villagers, you've been tainted. Claude didn't deny it. Ever since he had started dying and reviving at the hands of the villagers, he knew there was something deeply wrong with himself too. But he never dared to test whether he could still revive if killed by someone else. By now, Saul had a clear grasp of the situation. He leapt down from the rooftop. Although you and the villagers can resurrect after death, the process creates pollution and consumes energy with no source to replenish it. So you place the village here, killing any passers-by to harvest soul energy. Am I right? Claude hesitated, but the tiny blade lodged at the back of his skull made him think twice before doing anything reckless. Actually, the village wasn't always here. There are more people passing through this area, sure, but too many people isn't a good thing for me either. Claude mentioned something else. Half a year ago, I received a letter. The writer said that if I didn't want to mutate into a monster, I had to move the village here and wait for someone. Wait for who? The letter didn't say, but now I think maybe I was supposed to wait for you. An uneasy memory surged in Saul's mind. Who wrote the letter? Kismet. Saul's mouth twitched. Wonderful. He walked up to Claude. For now, I'll help you recover. As for the other villagers, it depends on whether you have any other useful information. 1 hour later, the small village had become lively once again. The villagers seemed to have forgotten all about the wizard who was supposed to come select apprentices. It had been a long time since they felt so lighthearted. They happily stood along the streets, chatting and sharing how they felt. Saul and Claude stood in front of the village chief's house like two invisible men. Thank you, Claude said with sincere gratitude. Saul was examining the milky white shell wind chime in his hand, one of the prices Claude had paid in exchange, the dream bell. It was said to soothe spirits and weave new memories for them. Pollution made the villagers terrifying, but it also gave them the power to exist in this world. Now that most of the pollution is gone, they won't last much longer. In this small village, besides Claude, no one else was truly alive. The reason they existed at all remained a mystery. Now that Saul had absorbed the pollution, the villagers' personalities had returned to normal, but their vitality was quickly fading. Maybe they'd last another month or 10 days. I knew it the moment you helped that girl with her pollution, Claude said. But for both me and them, this is a release. Perhaps, freed from this bizarre rule, they can finally rest, and I can finally let go of the past. Then I wish you all the best. Saul pocketed the wind chime and turned to leave, but halfway down the road he suddenly paused and turned back. Oh, right, I never asked. Who was the wizard who took you as an apprentice? Claude looked dazed. He thought for a moment before answering. My mentor is a third-rank wizard, Clark the Dreammaker. A third-rank wizard? Saul was surprised. The rules in this village, were they created by your mentor too? Could a third-rank wizard really wield such power? No, that's impossible. I remember something. The reason these rules are so strong is because this land itself has acknowledged them. This place is borderland. Just then the little girl ran over and tugged on Claude's sleeve. Little Claude, I found a huge tree hollow. Claude didn't look back at Saul. He simply smiled, bent down, and let the girl pull him away. Agu, he still doesn't want to wake from this dream. Morden, hard to see what's so special about him, for a third-rank wizard to choose him. And maybe that third-rank wizard has another goal. Herman. By now, Saul had walked roughly 500 meters from the nameless village. The brown dirt road beneath his feet abruptly turned into grass. He looked back, but the village had vanished. Ahead, Marsh was waving excitedly at him beside the carriage. Seeing Saul return, Marsh stammered, "Sir, just now you suddenly vanished and then suddenly appeared again." That's the overlapping effect of magic and rules. Saul was in a good mood after gathering so much information about the borderland. He hopped onto the carriage in 2 steps. As he bent down to enter, his legs gave out and he tumbled inside. Marsh had been holding the door open for him, only to watch Saul faceplant into the carriage. Marsh's eyes widened instantly. But the very next second he clamped his mouth shut, stifling a shout. He slammed the door, sat back in the driver's seat with a blank face and flicked the reins, steering the carriage in another direction. At the same time, the little girl who had been talking with Claude beside a big tree suddenly stopped. "What is it?" Claude bent over to ask her. "The water sound is gone," the girl said, shaking her head. Claude didn't understand. But the girl didn't answer. She simply shook her head again. Claude stood up and finally noticed that the others around him were also shaking their heads. Or rather, they were rocking their heads, like bottles being shaken. Claude frowned, puzzled. After a moment's thought, he imitated them and gave his own head a shake. "Swoosh, swoosh," he muttered in confusion, but the water sound was there all along, wasn't it? Chapter 513, Water in the Brain. In a lush, verdant forest, there stood an ancient tree with an enormous crown. Nestled among its branches was a beautifully crafted treehouse. Inside the treehouse, strings of wind chimes hung from every corner. From the roof to the windowsills, even beneath the chairs, milky white seashell chimes gently swayed. The doors and windows of the room were all tightly shut, as if afraid that even the slightest breeze might disturb the slumbering chimes. Ding-crack! A slender thread suddenly snapped, and one of the milky white seashell wind chimes plummeted from midair, shattering upon the floor. The man lying in the hammock turned his head to glance at it. He then cast Mage Hand, lifting the broken pieces of the chime into his palm. At that moment, a voice nearby mocked with schadenfreude, "Clark, one of your dreams just shattered." Clark, his tousled brown hair falling messily over his face, squinted as if still half asleep. "Oh, Kismet, when did you get here?" "When you were talking in your sleep." Kismet toyed with the harp in his hands, though not a single note escaped its strings. "Oh," Clark responded lazily again, and as if snacking, tipped the shards of the wind chime into his mouth. "Yawn tilde tilde." Clark opened his mouth wide and let out a huge yawn. As he yawned, several colorful butterflies flew out from his throat, but the moment he closed his mouth, they were pulled back in by some invisible force. No big deal. This was his response to Kismet's earlier words. "One dream breaks, I'll just make another." Suddenly, Clark seemed to remember something. He scratched his wild hair and said to Kismet, "Once my dream bells fill the borderland, you'll have to keep your promise, become the tongue of my chimes." Kismet sneered. "Herbert and Pear aren't even dead yet, and you're already dreaming about becoming master of the borderland." Clark lay back down again, lazily saying, "Soon. I'm just about to pull Pear completely into my dream. Next is Herbert." Kismet stretched the harp in his hand, morphing it into a silver bone. He slipped it beneath his collarbone like it belonged there. "Then I wish you eternal bliss in your beautiful illusions." Kismet made a few elegant loops with one hand over his chest, performing a graceful bow. With that, Kismet vanished in a flash of blinding white light. Clark looked at the chair Kismet had just vacated. With a flick of his index finger, the wooden chair scattered into a flurry of colorful butterflies, which drifted over and landed on another chair. No traps left behind, so what did he really come here for? Clark rested the back of his hand over his eyes, pondering the real reason for Kismet's sudden visit. And as he thought, he dozed off again. When Saul stepped into the carriage, he suddenly felt the world spin. The next moment he opened his eyes, he found himself plunging into a vast sea. Splash, splash. Caught off guard, Saul sank beneath the waves. Underwater was pitch black. Only a faint light shone from high above. Saul released a trail of bubbles, then adjusted his posture, using both hands and feet to swim upward toward the surface. Gasp! A few breaths later, Saul's head broke the surface, and he drew in a deep breath. Where is this place? How did I suddenly fall into the sea? Treading water, Saul kept his body upright and looked around. The sea stretched endlessly in every direction, not a speck of land in sight. The water was as black as ink and barely let any light through. It resembled the once polluted waters of Blue Water Bay, but the sea here was even darker, and the waves more violent. Though he had only been drifting for a short while, the waves had already crashed over him 3 times. He tried casting fly to lift himself into the air, but as soon as he gathered his magic, a crashing wave scattered it completely. The seawater here actually disrupts magic. Saul tried calling out for Agu and the others, even little Algie and Penny, but no one responded. What about my mental force? Refusing to give up, Saul extended his mental energy outward. This time it worked, but in the next instant he was startled to find the sound of crashing waves had moved inside his mind. When he shook his head, it felt like there was liquid sloshing inside. As they say, water in the brain. This water's definitely strange, but more importantly, how did I get here and how do I get back? The crashing surf in his head grew louder, the throbbing pain making it hard to think. Saul withdrew his mental energy and turned his focus inward to inspect his body. Something's wrong. Upon examination, he noticed immediately, this isn't my body, it's my consciousness. Am I inside another illusion? Ever since diving into soul studies, Saul had repeatedly found himself tangled up with illusion-wielding wizards and eerie beings, as if they were all drawn to him from the start. The pain in his head worsened. Even staying afloat became a struggle. Splash! Another wave crashed down, dragging Saul beneath the surface once more. His limbs refused to cooperate under the growing headache. Saul called out for the diary again, but this time it didn't appear either. Panic began to set in. He tried to swim back up, but was instead pulled deeper by a hidden current. This won't work. If I stay like this, I'll always be at the mercy of this place. I need to take back control. Control. The thought sparked something. Saul suddenly opened his eyes wide beneath the waves, then opened his mouth as well, letting the briny water flood in, tongue outstretched. He reached up to touch his tongue, and clearly felt the sorcery pattern etched into it. Mental realm. In that moment, a circular stone platform appeared beneath him, inscribed with the same sorcery pattern as his tongue. The platform began to rise, carrying Saul up through the water. Dark seawater poured down the platform's sides, but the raging sea could do nothing to stop its ascent. Still, the ocean didn't give up its pursuit. Its furious will manifested into towering waves, crashing down as if determined to shatter the stone platform entirely. Yet, though the platform lacked any visible support, it continued to rise steadily. But when it reached about 10 meters above the surface, it stopped, hovering in midair. The towering waves occasionally surged higher than the platform itself, slapping Saul's face with full force. To avoid being knocked off, Saul had to cling tightly to the center of the platform. He was utterly bedraggled, but no longer powerless. Wiping the water from his face, he muttered, "As I thought, this is my mental realm. That's why the platform appeared beneath me. But what does this black seawater invading my mental realm represent? Is it Claude's pollution, or a new enemy?" The waves refused to give up on dragging Saul down. But there will seem to realize that mere wave crashing wasn't enough. So from the ocean depths, small shimmering shapes began to emerge. These shadows were vague and hard to make out, but they were rising rapidly. Saul, meanwhile, clung to the platform's center to avoid getting knocked off, and didn't notice the change in the water. In fact, with the waves failing to dislodge him, he even found a moment to think between pulses of pain. "I've got the platform, what about the diary?" He managed to roll over, and there it was, floating just above him, the diary itself. The pages were already open, though Saul couldn't read them from this angle. Even so bedraggled as he was, Saul smiled. "That's right, this is my mental space." He looked past the diary, gazing further into the sky. Then, there should be stars too. The moment he thought it, the pitch-black sky suddenly filled with countless stars. The stars twinkled like innumerable blinking eyes. And just then, the shadows that had almost surfaced from the sea suddenly stopped, then sank even faster, retreating into the depths, as if fleeing in terror. Chapter 514, Old Witch. My head doesn't hurt anymore." After the shadows beneath the sea fled, the headache that had been tormenting Saul vanished as well. But when he shook his head, it still felt like there was water sloshing around inside. His left ear itched a little. Saul tilted his head to the left, then gave his right ear a pat. Splash! A distinct sound of water flowing came from his left ear canal, and he immediately felt something slide out of his ear. He raised his left hand just in time to catch it. Something cold and slick dropped into his palm. Looking down, he was surprised to see a single drop of black water. The drop seemed incredibly dense, immediately pooling together in his palm like a pearl. When Saul tilted his hand, it quivered slightly, like jelly. "So this is the water that got into my brain." Saul suddenly realized that it had been a while since the waves had slapped his face. He carefully stood up and walked to the edge of the circular platform. Only then did he notice that the once infinite ocean had somehow calmed. Even the sound of waves had quieted. The platform seems to have risen a few meters. No, it's the sea level that's dropped. That's actually good news. The danger, it seemed, had passed. From this angle, it kind of looks like the sea I saw during my first encounter with the Golden Page while I was unconscious. Back then it was the Golden Page that pulled me out of the sea, not the mental realm. Why didn't the diary respond today? Saul looked up and stretched out his right hand toward the sky. The diary finally responded, descending from above. As it landed in his palm, a thought struck him. Could it be the diary just doesn't like getting wet? The self-mocking thought flashed through his mind, helping to ease the tension. Saul then looked down at the diary's white pages, which were now inscribed with new text. Lunar calendar year 317, October 21st, clear skies. After getting water in your brain, you obtained a drop of pure black tide. Use it with caution. Remember this. In a wizard's world, pollution comes from the knowledge in your mind, the stars above your head, and the black tide within your heart. Another rare item acknowledged by the diary. No, it was more than just a rare item. Judging from the diary's tone, this was clearly one of the most terrifying things in this world. But where did this drop of black tide come from? Saul looked back and forth between the black tide drop in his left hand and the diary in his right, pondering the origin of this rare yet dangerous material. He thought back over the events of the past few days. Right, it must have been caused by absorbing the pollution from those villagers and from Claude. The ruthless instant-kill rule on those villagers probably stemmed from that pollution. Based on my previous experience, I assumed the pollution would be absorbed by the diary and the stars in the mental realm, and wouldn't affect me. I never expected that once it entered my body, the pollution would condense into a drop of black tide. It almost drowned me. Saul closed the diary and reflected on his oversight. I used pollution absorption to save people and exchanged it for intelligence about the borderland. But now it's clear I was too careless. The pollution here is far worse and more dangerous than anything in the western regions. If I keep acting recklessly just because I have the diary, I'll get myself killed sooner or later. Having learned a valuable lesson, Saul reviewed what he'd gained. Setting the intel aside, the Dream Bell is a pretty handy tool, but the most important thing is still this drop of black tide. Claude remembered at the end. The reason his village had such a powerful kill-on-sight rule was because that rule had been recognized by the borderland. But now it seems more accurate to say it was acknowledged by the black tide. So then, why is the borderland on par with the black tide? Agu once warned me, when facing danger in the borderland, always observe the rules of the area before deciding on a course of action. So does that mean any place with powerful rules is influenced by the black tide? Is the entire borderland soaked in black tide? The diary had clearly stated, pollution comes from the black tide within. If the borderland is saturated with black tide, then no wonder it's so dangerous. He might have just stumbled upon something monumental. Saul looked down from the platform again. The black tide had retreated so far that he couldn't even make out its edge, and more of the starry sky now surrounded the circular platform on all sides. Time to go back. Saul clenched the drop of black tide in his hand and was about to close his eyes and return to his body when something caught his attention. Wait, the diary just said today is the 21st, but it was the 17th when I got here. What happened to those 3 days? If he really had been trapped in the mental realm for that long, then outside, only marsh was left. He must be worried sick by now. Saul steadied himself, preparing for the worst, then finally closed his eyes. Consciousness returned. When Saul slowly opened his eyes, he found himself in a dim little room, a row of wooden bars right in front of him. Beneath him was a cold stone floor, behind a rough stone wall. He looked around and sighed silently. This is not a great situation. Saul was locked inside a wooden cage, barely tall enough for a person to crouch in. Must have been captured by someone while I was trapped in my mental form. Still, if all they did was lock me up. Saul checked his body in the cramped space. Everything was intact, even his clothes hadn't been tampered with. Guess that's a small mercy. I really need to stop casually absorbing pollution. You're awake, came a raspy, old woman's voice from the shadows. A terrifying face suddenly appeared outside the cage, squished tightly between the wooden bars. Her face was wrinkled like a dried-up prune, with huge eyes and ears. Her thin, white hair was tied in a high knot, with a wiggling finger dangling from the tip like a charm. When she spoke, her mouth stretched nearly to her ears. If you'd stayed unconscious any longer, I would have had to take you apart and see if anything was still useful. Where's my coachman? Saul couldn't sense her power level, but it likely wasn't beyond second rank. As the old woman opened her mouth, a foul, fishy smell wafted out. It was as if she had a salted fish stuck in her throat. That coachman of yours has been asking about you non-stop these past few days, and now that you're awake, you're asking about him. How touching. He's doing just fine. After a few days of watering, new mushrooms have started to grow on him. Saul's eyes widened. You planted him. The old woman scratched her chin with a thick, calloused finger. Now that's not a bad idea. So he was still alive. Saul relaxed his shoulders and subtly rubbed his left wrist under the sleeve of his robe. There, hidden beneath a slight bulge in the skin, was the storage device he'd bought in Kaugus City. The fact that she hadn't taken it gave him some reassurance. Who are you? Why did you capture me and my coachman? Capture isn't quite right. The old woman twirled her finger and grinned playfully. You two were trash I picked up while I was out. Some trash can still be useful. Others, I have to take them apart to see if they have any valuable components. As for me, just call me Old Witch. You don't need to know anything else. Saul glanced left and right and found that there were over a dozen cages near his own. 5 of them had occupants, some human, some not. The rest were empty. Two of the prisoners clearly radiated the aura of first-rank wizards. So the old woman really was a second-rank wizard. Saul took a deep breath and almost gagged from the stench. "Ms. Old Witch." "No honorifics," she cut him off. "I don't like phony respect from people who curse me in their hearts." "All right then, Old Witch, what would it take for you to let me go?" Saul relaxed his shoulders again. The old witch reached into the cage and dragged a coarse, bony finger along Saul's chin. "The things I pick up are mine. I never let them go. I only take them apart when they're no longer useful." Chapter 515, Imprisoned. Useful people still have the chance to be locked up. Useless people become nothing more than dismembered materials. What kind of person is considered useful to you? Saul looked the old witch in the eye and asked calmly. "Heh, you seem to have a decent head on your shoulders." The old witch withdrew her hand. "I want to forge the most perfect body. It must have the beauty of elves, the resilience of giants, the strength of dwarves, the adaptability of barbarians. And most importantly, it must have a genius-level elemental magic adaptability." The old witch looked at Saul like she was appraising meat on a butcher's block, weighing which part was fat and which part was lean. "I'm close to success. When the time comes, I will become the most gifted of all wizards. Those so-called Dreammaker, Lord of Fireflies, and Wind Sprite will be mere foils next to me." Claude had once told Saul that there were currently no fourth-rank wizard in the Borderland. The three most powerful third-rank wizard were widely considered to be Dreammaker Clark, Lord of Fireflies Herbert, and Wind Sprite Pear. Saul suddenly understood. "I see, you need an assistant to help with your experiments." The old witch didn't deny it. Saul offered a humble smile. "As it happens, I have some skill in researching wizard body modification formulas." "Heh," the old witch laughed, her little finger twitching madly behind her head. "A mere first-rank wizard dares to claim they're skilled. Are all young people this arrogant nowadays? Do you think the kind of modification I seek is as simple as what an apprentice might do, adding an eye or swapping blood?" No, Saul knew it was always best to back up one's words. He raised his hand, and his fingertip gradually turned transparent. "I've undergone 2 rounds of body modification myself. I know very well it's not just about swapping some tissues." The old witch's eyes locked onto Saul's hand, watching as his skin and the muscle and blood vessels beneath turned semi-transparent gray, revealing the white bone at the center. True modification involves multiple body systems. One must also consider allergies, immune responses, self-repair capabilities, and the flow of magic and mental energy. Sometimes, what looks like a clash between materials is actually caused by microscopic tissue failure under the modification conditions. As she listened and watched Saul's finger transform, the old witch's scornful expression began to fade. Her eyes narrowed slightly. She pressed her lips together, though the blood-red corners of her mouth slowly curled upward. "Interesting. Let me ask you a question. If your answer satisfies me, then at least until I finish my modifications, you won't have to die." "Please ask." "How does one prevent bodily aging? How do you extend the lifespan of microtissues?" Saul lowered his gaze, forcing himself not to look at the old witch's withered, wrinkled face. After a moment of thought, he answered, "Aging on the surface is due to tissue shrinkage. They're no longer plump like when newly formed. Internal aging comes from slower regeneration, so we can address it in 2 ways. First, by supplementing. Second, by accelerating tissue regeneration." He deliberately left a flaw in his answer. It was just a test. There was no need to offer her a perfect explanation. Besides, giving the old witch a flaw might be giving himself a future lifeline. Suddenly, the old witch reached into the cage and grabbed Saul's arm. Her fingertips tightened, sharp nails scratching his semi-transparent skin and leaving several bloody marks. Red blood dripped from the wounds, mixed with some barely visible gray granules. The old witch withdrew her hand and licked her fingertips one by one, the dark purple tip of her tongue smearing red across it. "He he ha ha ha," she shook with laughter, her wrinkled face trembling with each chuckle. After nearly a full minute of laughing, she suddenly turned her head toward the neighboring cage and said to the person inside, "Akali, I've found someone to replace you. Be careful." Saul turned to look as well. In the same type of wooden cage, about 4 or 5 meters to his left, a person lay on their side with their back facing them. The cage was small, forcing the person to curl up tightly, with both head and knees tucked to their chest. Hearing the old witch's words, the person only shifted slightly, without offering a response. The old witch didn't mind. Gripping the cage's wooden bars, she slowly pulled herself up. "Well then, I'm off to check on my little darling. I'll come see you again tomorrow. Use this time to think more carefully about my question. I don't want just a few seemingly correct big-picture answers." She turned and walked toward the door. Saul stepped closer to the bars. "Old witch, my coachman. At the moment, he's more useful than you. Better think about how to keep yourself alive." The old witch stepped out and closed the door. Saul noted that the room outside was dim as well. It seemed he was the only one still conscious in this room. The figures in the other cages were either curled up sitting or curled up lying down. They looked like they'd been locked up for quite a long time. There were likely magic formations imbued into the cages that restricted power. While sitting here, Saul's magic and mental fluctuations were forcefully suppressed to extremely low levels. With no way to open the cage for now, Saul shifted his attention to the room. Rough stone bricks lined the walls, ceiling, and floor. The shape of the room itself was irregular, and the ground formed a crude polygon. The only source of light was a plant with an oval-shaped bud, which looked so wilted it was on the verge of dying. Around the glowing plant were several wooden cages placed at various distances. Saul's cage was the farthest back, right against the wall. Upon closer inspection, he realized there were 5 other occupied cages besides his own. 3 of those occupants had particularly unusual physiques. In the cage directly across from Saul sat a giant. Saul's own cage stood just over a meter tall, but the one across from him was nearly 2 meters. Even so, when the giant sat curled up inside, his head still pressed against the top of the cage. He looked extremely uncomfortable. Next to the giant was someone the complete opposite, a dwarf, barely a meter tall by rough estimate. To Saul's left, against the wall, lay a man with his upper body on the ground and his legs curled up and propped against the wall. Saul noticed the black markings on his body and concluded the man was likely a barbarian, more specifically, a barbarian priest, one of their spellcasting types. Next to the man the old witch had called Akali, on Akali's left, was probably a true wizard as well, but this one's aura was faint and weak. Perhaps sensing Saul's gaze, or maybe emboldened by the old witch's departure, Akali, who had been curled on the ground, slowly sat up. He looked to be no longer young, with graying temples and large patches of age spots covering his skin. "Let's hope you really do know wizard body modification," Akali said, staring at his own toes. "The last 2 who claimed they did are now nothing more than silent, motionless magic materials." It was good to have someone to talk to. Taking advantage of his relatively small frame, Saul shifted his posture in the cage. The old witch captured us all just to assist her in those modification experiments. "Of course not," Akali replied listlessly, still not looking at Saul. "Outsiders, the borderland has many magic materials found nowhere else, but here, wizards themselves are also just another kind of material." Chapter 516, Mushroom Soup. Akali didn't seem to believe that Saul was skilled in wizard body modification. He was probably only talking to him, because he'd been locked up for so long he was already half mad. Saul didn't rush to prove his abilities either. After all, the more dangerous the situation, the more the diary could unleash its extraordinary warning abilities. Right, dear diary. How long have you all been locked up here? Has anyone ever gotten out? Sure enough, Akali had lost it. Though he looked sluggish, that didn't stop him from replying right away. I've been locked up here for 3 years. I've never seen anyone leave in one piece, in chunks or thousands of pieces. That I've seen plenty. Looks like the fates of those imprisoned here weren't exactly pleasant. But for Akali to survive in such an environment for 3 years, he must have his own tricks. Saul decided to pay close attention to how Akali managed to stay alive. Of course, Saul's goal wasn't just survival, but he reminded himself of one thing. In the borderland, before making a move, you have to understand the rules. Saul had already shown a portion of his hand. The old witch would at least give him some time to prove his usefulness. Facing Akali, Saul put on a curious look like a child. If we help the old witch complete her perfect talent-based wizard body modification, do you think she'd let us go? This time, Akali finally lifted his eyelids and gave Saul a glance. Perfect talent. You're not wrong. If such a modification succeeded, it'd indeed be a perfect talent. But do you think that's possible? Perfect might be out of reach, but we have to at least try to get close. Otherwise, what? Just sit here and wait to die. She's a second-rank wizard. Unless one of us can advance here and now in this kind of environment, killing us would be effortless for her. Saul appeared very motivated. He reached out to grab the bars in front of him and tried channeling his magic. But after all that effort, the magic he produced could only light a tiny flame. He then tried to snap the bars, but these wooden-looking rails were made from who knew what material. They didn't budge an inch. Saul continued by trying to vibrate his mental energy to soften and deform his skin, but at most, he could make his skin turn faintly translucent. Any more than that, and the cage would suppress him, forcibly stabilizing his soul body. He let go and said to Akali, "What a formidable cage. I've never seen material like this." "There's a lot you haven't seen. Judging by your face, you're not even 30 yet. These young wizards nowadays, they hear that the borderland is full of rare materials, and without gauging their own strength, they just charge and head first." Watching Saul fumble with nothing to show for it, Akali's lips curled into a mocking smile. But then, remembering his own situation, the smile turned bitter. "Master Akali, with your broad knowledge and rich experience, is there truly no way out of here?" "No," Akali answered swiftly this time, then with effort lay back down again. "Don't waste your energy. The old witch won't let you off just because of a few clever words. Better think about surviving tomorrow's test." Seeing Akali unwilling to talk further, Saul turned to observe the others. But they were either motionless and unresponsive, or seemingly couldn't understand a word he said. Take that barbarian, for example. Saul closed his eyes and pretended to rest, while conversing silently with the consciousnesses in his mind. The lighting was dim, and no one could tell how much time had passed. The door creaked open again. The old witch walked in, pushing a small cart. Judging by the changes in his body and the state of his soul body, Saul estimated it had been about 3 hours. "Time to eat. Honestly, I still have to cook for you a lot, but be sure to thank the newcomer. Because of him, today's meal includes mushrooms." Except for the barbarian, everyone received a bowl of soup. A few pure white mushrooms floated on top. The bowls were small enough to fit through the gaps between the bars. Saul was the last to receive his. As he hesitated with the bowl in hand, the others had already begun slurping eagerly. The broth was crystal clear with a hint of oil, and 2 thumb-sized mushrooms floated on top. As Saul looked at the mushrooms, he immediately noticed they resembled the ones growing on the coachman Marsh's head. It made him suspect again. Had the old witch really planted Marsh in the ground? Unfortunately, there was no way for him to find out now. Still, Marsh's mushrooms were in a symbiotic state with him. As long as the old witch hadn't killed him at the start and she wanted more mushrooms, she probably wouldn't kill him either. The mushrooms looked ordinary, but the soup clearly was. Saul narrowed his eyes, and the moment he focused, the transparent soup turned inky green, with little yellow bubbles floating within. It looked eerie and disturbing. Who knew if it was poisoned? Seeing Saul hadn't taken a sip yet, the old witch tapped the bars with her finger. Clang, clang. If you don't want to die, drink it, or I'll dissect you right now. Agu, this potion is called Fletcher's Heartfelt Soup. It's a low-cost potion used to maintain basic life functions. The person who invented it originally made it to imprison a runaway lover. Anyone who drinks this will lose their sense of direction. Saul clicked his tongue. Seeing the old witch squinting at him already, he quickly tipped the bowl and downed the heartfelt soup in one gulp. Once she saw Saul finish every last drop, the old witch finally let out a snort and took away the empty bowl. No one was allowed to keep their bowl. The old witch wasn't about to let them stash any items in the cage. Akali took another glance at Saul after finishing his soup. From now on, you really won't be able to leave anymore. He sounded disappointed that Saul had been so obedient. After speaking, he turned his back and lay down. This time, Saul didn't try talking to him again. Because right then, the two mushrooms he had just gulped down began dancing on his tongue. They twirled around for a while, then, seemingly exhausted, slid smoothly down his throat. Saul lowered his head and covered his face, recalling the image the mushrooms had drawn on his tongue. It seemed to say, "I'm okay, too." What does that mean? Saul wiped his face and looked up again. He suddenly realized the old witch had somehow returned. Her face was pressed right up against the bars, staring at him. Had she been there the whole time? Dizzy yet? It's always like this the first time. You'll get used to it after a few more rounds. Hearing this, Saul instantly understood. First-time drinkers of the heartfelt soup would probably get disoriented from losing their sense of direction. But he didn't feel anything at all. No time to wonder why. He switched into acting mode immediately. He drew on his memories of being half-drunk, gazing at the old witch with a dazed expression and staying silent. The old witch seemed amused. She reached through the bars and dragged Saul out. Saul followed behind her listlessly. Where are we going? He wasn't sure if he should act more confused, so he simply slowed his speech, not daring to overdo it. The old witch laughed. To my lab. If you behave, you might just get to come back. Chapter 517. A shock from a straight-A student. After leaving the room where the others were held, what lay ahead was an extremely primitive tunnel. The surroundings were all soil, with faint traces of formations used for reinforcement. The only lighting came from the glowing plants at their feet. Saul followed closely behind the old witch. They passed the first door, then the second, and only after walking for about 5 minutes did they reach the third. The third door was just half a meter from the fourth, after which another long, dim corridor stretched ahead. I must be underground or inside a mountain, Saul silently estimated, trying to sense the airflow to determine the direction of the exit. The old witch stopped at the third door and pushed it open to enter. Behind the door was clearly a laboratory, though most of the equipment appeared quite primitive. There weren't many glass instruments, most of it was wood. To account for liquid seepage, everything was coated in some unknown substance. Since you claim to be skilled at wizard body modification, let's start with a simple assignment. Show me what you can do. The old witch shoved Saul inside and made him sit down at a table. Then she rummaged through a cabinet by the wall and slammed a large basin in front of him. Inside the basin was a heap of rolled-up parchment scrolls. Saul took all the scrolls in hand, revealing a dough-like mass hidden beneath them. But on closer look, that dough was continuously wriggling. When Saul poked it with a finger, the mass immediately sank in and didn't bounce back for a long time. But the moment he turned to look at the contents of the scrolls, the mass instantly returned to its original shape. With a talent as strong as yours, I assume I don't need to explain anything. I'll come check on you this time tomorrow. If you haven't improved this modification concept by then, I'll slam you into the basin. The old witch didn't bother to explain anything, leaving Saul to figure it out himself. Seeing that Saul had no questions, she headed straight into the room next door, not even closing the door behind her, fully confident that Saul couldn't escape. Saul had only one day to review and solve the problem, but he didn't panic. Calmly, he began spreading out all the parchments. With no room on the table, he placed some on the floor. All right, 10 scrolls per person. It's fine if you don't have any ideas yet. Let's start by organizing the questions. Saul rolled his neck, twisted his wrists, and suddenly felt as if he'd returned to those days in the Wizard Tower, when all he had to do was study. A day passed. The old witch let out a long sigh and slowly stood up from the ground. Though she always claimed her wizard body modification experiment was nearing success, only she knew the truth. Her work had been stuck at a critical step for over a year now. The breakthroughs brought by Akali in the past hadn't been useful lately. Every suggestion he made now was useless. Hopefully that boy can come up with something new. Even if he only solves one small problem, it'll help. If he spends an entire day and still accomplishes nothing, if he can't even see through it, then I'll know, forget it. Things have been tense lately, too dangerous to go out capturing people. Maybe I'll give that boy a few more chances. After all, even Master Alchemist Akali couldn't solve my issue. She shook her head. Just as she was about to take a step, her left foot didn't follow her right, nearly making her fall. Her expression twisted in pain, as if she were suppressing a surge of rage. She rolled up the pants around her left ankle and saw that it was constantly shifting shape, as if someone were kneading her calf like dough. Gritting her teeth, her massive lower jaw nearly engulfed the upper half of her face. She raised a hand and smacked her calf several times, loud enough that she could hear bones cracking. Then, in the next instant, she used magic to heal herself, and the distortion in her leg ceased. She lifted her head, straightened her pants, and walked out as though nothing had happened. Out the door, left turn, into another room. There she saw Saul sitting at a round table, resting his chin on one hand. All the parchment had been opened and spread across the floor. On the table, discarded paper was crumpled into a small mountain. Saul's brow was tightly furrowed and sweat clung to his forehead, about to drip but never falling. The pen in his hand trembled midair, its ink hanging on the verge of falling, but he never put it to the page. The old witch frowned at the sight, thinking, does he have no ideas at all? And he had the nerve to claim he was good at wizard body modification. She felt a flash of anger at being fooled. With her first step, she was already thinking about tearing him apart for materials. But by the time her second foot landed, her thoughts had shifted. Forget it, I'll just make up an excuse to let him pass for now. Maybe 3 days or 10, maybe a month. If he still hasn't come up with anything after a month, then. At that thought, the old witch caught sight of the page in front of Saul. Densely covered with writing. She froze, then quickly stepped closer, moving to Saul's side. And Saul was still lost in thought, seemingly unaware that the old witch was standing right next to him. She looked at the writing on the page. At first, she studied it like a judge reviewing homework, but the deeper she read, the more immersed she became. A fresh, brilliant line of reasoning. far more compelling than gossip between the firefly and the wind sprite. She read from the beginning all the way to the end. When she finally saw a drop of ink that had fallen on the page, she spent a moment wondering what strange new rune it might be, before realizing it was just ink from the tip of the pen. What happens next? Why did he stop writing? The old witch felt as if her heart was being scratched raw. At the same time, she was stunned by Saul's ingenious ideas. She even had the urge to crack open Saul's skull and see how his brain was wired. Saul seemed startled. The pen dropped from his hand onto the table. He looked up at the old witch's ugly face, now just inches away, then glanced at the messy pile of papers on the table. His voice trembled slightly. I ran into a problem. I might need a bit more time." What? The old witch turned her head stiffly, like a machine glitching, staring at Saul's youthful face, unable to say the words that lingered in her throat. "You're almost done solving this entire modification theory." Yes. The task she had given Saul wasn't some random project. It was the exact same wizard body modification experiment she had been working on, one aiming to fuse the traits of multiple races into a perfect body. She had been holed up in this place for years. This experiment was her only hope of redemption. Why would she waste time designing other assignments? And not telling Saul the true nature of the experiment was meant to avoid stressing him out. If he knew how difficult it really was, he might freeze up and fail to even begin. This was a lesson she'd learned from experimenting on over a dozen captives. But no matter what, she never imagined Saul would spend just one day to break through the obstacle that had blocked her for a year, and even push the modification formula to its final step. The old witch struggled to open her mouth. She could almost hear her teeth warring with each other. How much longer do you need to overcome the last obstacle?" Saul opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Carefully, he raised one finger. "Would a month be okay?" The old witch opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Fine." Saul knowledge changes fate. Chapter 518, Repairing the Walkway in the Open. In the end, the old witch still gave Saul 1 month's time. Even though from the beginning, she had already decided to give Saul a month to study. A month before, a month after, nothing seemed different, yet everything somehow was. The old witch escorted Saul back to his cage with a blank face, not uttering another word the entire way. Saul followed closely behind her, looking somewhat uneasy, as if afraid she might change her mind halfway and retract the 1 month she'd granted him. This time when Saul was brought back, the other cellmates all looked over. When they saw Saul had returned alive, they finally stopped treating him like air. "He actually pulled it off," muttered the wizard in the cage to the left of Achille, who had never spoken to Saul before. The giant and the dwarf also followed Saul with their eyes. In their gazes there was surprise, fear, and a deep sense of worry. As Saul passed by, the barbarian suddenly burst into a loud, unpleasant tune, even hooking his foot on the overhead bars, attempting to hang himself upside down. "Quiet!" Smack! The old witch mercilessly drew a wooden stick and lashed it hard at the barbarian's foot clinging to the bars. With a thud, the barbarian crashed to the ground, silently clutching his foot and wailing in pain. Saul noticed that the sole of the man's foot, struck just once, had a long strip of skin torn clean off. That wooden stick seemed as if it could devour flesh. The room, previously bubbling like boiling water, instantly fell back into deathly silence. The old witch shoved Saul into the half-height cage, still glaring at him with a vicious look. "Remember, you only have, cough cough, 1 month. Either you complete the task I gave you, or 1 month from today lunch comes with meat." With that said, she turned and left, her retreating figure still radiating an overbearing presence. But Saul, just locked back into the cage, gripped the bars with both hands and looked at the old witch's back. A faint smile flashed in his eyes. After the old witch shut the main door and left, the others in the cages looked at Saul again. This time, the first to speak was Akali. "Looks like your performance pleased the old witch," he said, examining Saul with a probing gaze. Saul withdrew his expression and lowered his head with a bitter smile. "Pleased? Which eye of yours saw that? I didn't even complete her task. Who knows what'll happen in a month?" Akali looked puzzled at first, then gradually showed a thoughtful expression. The wizard on Akali's other side muttered under his breath. The old witch actually softened up. He glanced at Saul a few times, then looked down and said with unclear meaning, "Maybe our new companion pleased her in other ways." Before Saul could react, Akali's face visibly flashed with disgust. He glanced sideways but said nothing. The others remained silent. The barbarian gave no reaction, while the giant and the dwarf looked at Saul with something close to eagerness. But since they didn't speak the same language, Saul couldn't understand their muttering. Eventually, everyone lost interest in Saul again and slumped back into their hunched positions. Only then did Saul slowly bury his head into his arms, a faint, satisfied smile creeping over his face. Just as he had finished researching the perfect body modification for the wizard's experiments, a new idea had suddenly sparked in his mind. And for this idea to take shape, he needed time. More importantly, he needed materials and tools. Saul thought he'd have to wait until the daily soup ration to see the old witch again. But only about 10 minutes later, she suddenly burst in. She wasn't pushing a cart, nor carrying anything. She merely stormed up to Saul's cage and gripped the bars, scrutinizing him from head to toe. Just when Saul thought she was about to speak or assign him a new task, the old witch turned and left without a word. Even when she returned later to serve the soup and took Akali with her, she still didn't say another word to Saul. After Akali left, another wizard curled his lip at Saul and said, "Figures, got excited for nothing." Saul still said nothing. He merely glanced at the wizard who buzzed around like a fly, then closed his eyes, pretending to meditate. Inwardly, he was communicating with the other consciousnesses. "Our modification plan has no flaws, right? And this plan combines the Bloodrose family's century-long research in flesh magic with Master's soul resin techniques. With Master's high-speed simulations, there's no way she can spot any flaws." The perfect body modification scheme researched by the old witch was indeed difficult. An ordinary first-rank wizard would never be able to tackle such a challenge. But Saul wasn't an ordinary first-rank wizard. In the years he spent at the Wizard Tower, he had devoted massive energy to studying body modification. Later on, he even delved into Gorsa's experiments related to vessel construction for reviving Ura. His knowledge and insights in body modification and body crafting surpassed many second-rank wizards. And just before entering the Borderland, he had received the Bloodrose family's ultimate modification blueprint, Flesh-Soul Fusion, from N. In terms of knowledge reserves and practical experience in this field, Saul was on an entirely different level than the old witch or Akali could ever imagine. Not to mention, he still had the diary, the dead wizard's diary, which held the power of absolute veto, capable of directly revealing whether the end of a line of thought was correct or not. So within just one day, Saul had forcefully pushed forward the experimental progress that the old witch, Akali, and the others had been struggling with for years. In fact, they were not far from completion. But when Saul broke down the final step, he deliberately held back, leaving himself a trump card. Truthfully, completing the entire modification formula didn't require a month at all. Some unknown time later, Akali was dragged back by the old witch. Once back in his cage, he sat facing Saul, staring blankly for a long time without speaking. It wasn't until the others seemed to be asleep that Akali suddenly pressed his face against the bars, glaring at Saul. "How did you come up with a solution to the racial attribute incompatibility problem?" Akali asked in a hushed voice, as if not wanting the others to hear. Saul, who had been meditating with his eyes closed, moved over kindly to the edge of his cage, close to Akali's side. "I once saw my master conduct a similar experiment." "Who's your master?" You probably don't know him." Although the title of Wizard Tower Master carried some weight, Saul figured that with Gorse's personality, the chance of running into enemies was higher than running into friends. "I think we could work together in the future." Akali's voice dropped even lower. After a good night's sleep, Saul stretched lazily. Unable to perform deep meditation in the cage had at least let him enjoy some real sleep. From that day on, whenever the old witch conducted experiments, she would take Saul and Akali out together. They spent the first 2 days verifying that Saul's theory was indeed practically viable. Then they began conducting experiments following Saul's formulas and reasoning. The old witch's temper clearly improved. Even when the barbarian went into another fit, she no longer beat anyone. While Akali didn't contribute much in terms of problem solving, he was meticulous and precise in executing experiments, saving Saul a lot of tedious groundwork. As the perfect body modification gradually got on track, a few days later, the old witch suddenly discovered her supply of materials had run low. "Why are we going through them so fast?" she frowned, hands on her hips. "Is it because of all the extra control groups we've been running?" "I'm going out for a bit," she said, walking up to the two busy wizards and interrupting their work. Though she was reluctant to leave at such a crucial moment, she had to take the risk to avoid delaying progress. "Ah, all right," Saul responded, reluctantly setting down the charcoal pen in his hand. He disliked how little ink water pens carried, so he had made his own charcoal pen. But just as he put down the pen and braced against the table to follow her, he realized she wasn't moving. "What's wrong?" "This time you're not going back into your cages," the old witch grinned, though her eyes remained cold. "Continue your research here, but don't even think about running. No matter how far you go, I will drag you back." "Is that so?" Saul smiled happily. "Don't worry, I won't run." Chapter 519, The Great Perfection. Saul had thought about escaping the moment he was locked into the old witch's cage. But after all, the old witch was a second-rank wizard, and she had always been mysterious, never revealing her true strength. She only used various magical tools and potions to imprison and restrain people. If it weren't for the unmistakable fluctuations of magic around her, Saul might have doubted whether she was truly a second rank. However, once he began conducting the perfect body wizard body transformation experiments alongside the old witch and Akali, he temporarily forgot about escaping. "Come on." After leaving the campus, the Wizard Tower, where else could you get to use magical materials and potions for free? Besides, Saul was hiding the real progress of his research on this transformation. On the surface, he was still stuck on the problem of how to stabilize and preserve the best traits after multiple bodies fused together. For that, he constantly adjusted parameters and ran multiple reference experiment groups at once. But in truth, half of those reference groups were secretly simulating the wizard body transformation plan he had just received from N, the flesh-soul fusion. It just happened to be a transformation of his own body, so many issues overlapped. Saul designed many experimental bodies to test how the transformation before, during, and after would feed back to his own spirit body. As a result, the old witch's ample supply of magical materials was drained within a few days. So when the old witch said she had to go out and warned Saul and Akali not to try to escape, Saul sincerely promised he wouldn't. But when the old witch left, Saul didn't immediately return to his experiment desk. He leaned against the wall and slowly walked out of the laboratory. "Where are you going?" Akali shouted from where he stood. "Don't worry, I'm not running away, just taking a walk." Akali was still uneasy and staggered after him. Because he had been taking the old witch's nourishing soup, Akali had to hold onto tables or walls to walk. Otherwise, he would just spin in place, like a ghost blocking his vision. Although Saul wasn't affected, to make the old witch relax her guard, he imitated Akali's way of walking, holding onto the wall. Saul moved in the direction the old witch had gone, turning twice and passing several similar rooms before he finally saw sunlight ahead. He actually walked all the way to the exit just like that. And the opening in front of him had no door blocking it at all. It looked like one step out and Saul could escape this cage. "Hey, don't test the old witch's temper," Akali trailed behind, incredulous. He wondered how Saul could walk so fast without feeling dizzy. Or did Saul have some way to counteract the poison in the nourishing soup? Akali's eyes flickered. "Hey, believe me or not, if you dare to step out of that opening, the old witch will skin you alive, and then have you continue doing experiments for her completely naked." "Naked like that?" Saul rolled his eyes and turned back to Akali. "I'm not going out." Then he pushed open a door. Near the opening there were 2 rooms. Saul opened the second room, counted from the exit. The door wasn't locked, but as Saul was about to enter, a sudden flash of electric sparks appeared along the cross-section of the door and the wall. Saul was zapped once. His extended fingertips blackened, but he didn't panic and instead examined the surroundings. Sure enough, there were magical runes etched on the top of the doorframe and the threshold. Saul squinted and looked carefully for a moment, feeling this formation wasn't difficult. Even without the diary's help, he was confident he could solve it within half a day. Is it that I lack experience or what? Why do I feel the wizards I meet in the borderland have poor theoretical knowledge? Since the perfect body transformation experiment, Saul had noticed that neither the old witch, nor Akali, and even Claude he met earlier, seemed to focus much on theory. They were more into practice, like a bunch of street fighters who had fought their way through with real weapons. It wasn't that their strength was weak, but if they were asked to do precise, scientific research, their brains would overload. Still, Saul didn't underestimate the old witch at all. After being zapped, he didn't try to break the formation but stood by the door and called inside. "Marsh, are you in there?" The white mushroom he drank had left him 2 messages. One was "I'm safe" signal. The other was just the number 2. Saul didn't know what that 2 meant, or if the mushroom hadn't finished writing it. But today, after seeing the second room from the exit, he wondered if 2 meant Marsh was locked in the second room. Inside the room were some ordinary miscellaneous items, bottles and jars, shelves, and several wide-mouthed urns stacked in a corner. "Brother Saul, should I go in and check?" Penny, who was still in the diary, volunteered. "Forget it. Although your existence is special, this is after all a second-rank wizard's base." Penny didn't dare to appear in front of Gorsa. Better not risk it here. At that moment, an echo finally came from inside. "Master, is that you, Master?" Saul followed the voice and locked his gaze on one of the urns in the corner. Clusters of white mushrooms about thumb-thick grew abruptly out of the urn's mouth. The mushroom caps tilted and wobbled, spreading tiny spores. Unfortunately, the spores hadn't traveled far before they seemed to meet a flame and quickly ignited, turning to black ash dust. "Master, I can't get out." Saul's mouth twitched, not knowing how to respond. Though the urn was wide-mouthed, it was only half a meter tall and had limited volume. Even if Marsh curled up, he couldn't fit inside. Unless there was a spatial magic formation inside. But who would inscribe a spatial spell just to eat mushrooms? Better not mention Marsh's current situation for now. It's me, Saul replied. Stay there and don't move. I'll take you with me when I leave. All right, master. The urn shook slightly, then calmed. There was nothing else useful in the room. After a quick scan, Saul closed the door and moved to the room closest to the exit. But that room was locked. Though Saul had several ways to open the door tightly shut magic, out of respect for the old witch, he gave up on exploring it for now. There would be chances to investigate later. Akali, who had been following Saul, finally relaxed when he saw him return. Don't worry, I was just looking around. I'm not thinking of running away. The two started heading back. When they were near the lab again, Akali suddenly whispered, "It's not that you can't have thoughts of escape, just that you can't have them before you're ready." Saul looked back silently. Akali stared at him seriously. Agu, looks like Akali wants to escape, but he isn't ready yet. And the fox's tail is starting to show Tilda. Though Saul seemed obediently locked up and diligently helping the old witch with experiments, he had his own plans. Now that he was sure Akali had plans too, he worried whether those plans might interfere with his own. Saul lowered his voice and asked, "So, when is ready?" "Do you know the term approximate?" Saul nodded. "In wizard ranks, there's a similar term like approximately second rank," Akali said seriously. "Oh, Tilda, I see," Saul suddenly understood. "So first rank great perfection, right?" Chapter 520, Akali's Vengeance Plan. The two of them continued walking along the wall, making their way back to the old witch's laboratory. Since their master wasn't present, the conversation continued. "Do you know what it takes for a first-rank wizard to advance to second rank?" Improve mental power and magic. Once the quantity hits its limit, compress it to trigger the qualitative leap. Advancing from first rank to second rank would at least double one's strength. If one had accumulated enough power while at first rank, the boost could even be fourfold or more. Coupled with access to more powerful spells and the ability to use more dangerous tools, even several first-rank wizards combined wouldn't be a match for a second rank. That's right, but that's just the basics. Akali had already returned to his original lab area, though he didn't resume his experiments. If you want to accumulate vast amounts of magic and mental power, then compress it for that qualitative change. That's a very long process. It's difficult to even tell if your failure in compression is due to insufficient power or a flaw in your technique. Many powerful first-rank wizards die before ever completing their metamorphosis into second rank. You mean there are other ways to reach second rank? Of course. Akali picked up a severed non-human finger and held it up before him. To trigger a qualitative transformation, you don't necessarily need a quantitative one. You can also just mutate. Though Akali used the word mutate, Saul knew he wasn't referring to psychological insanity. Saul said uncertainly, "But whether it's magic mutating or mental power mutating, it could still cause aberration and turn a wizard into a contaminated one." Akali smiled faintly. "I'm not talking about magic or mental power. Those are our core foundations, present since birth, like the base structure of a house. You can't tamper with them casually." "Then you mean," Saul stopped mid-sentence, suddenly realizing the answer, "the locator." Akali's smile widened. "Yes, exactly. The locator. Only a locator that is both mine and not mine can undergo a safer mutation. If you don't like the word mutation, you can call it enhancement instead." Saul's thoughts drifted to the diary. "My locator is already twisted enough, already powerful enough. Trying to enhance it even further feels like I'd rather mutate myself. If I can combine the Bloodthorn family's flesh fusion technique with my own soul resin and create a third-generation wizard body transformation, then on top of my current body, I could gain even more magic and mental power." With that kind of foundation, if I advance using the most conventional method in the future, my strength could be multiplied tenfold, maybe even more. It all depends on the final result of the transformation. Akali gave Saul a moment to think, but he couldn't wait too long. Who knew when the old witch might return? He had to seize this rare chance for a real conversation. I have a method to modify your locator. It's a bit risky. Do you dare to try it? So we've finally reached the real topic. Saul realized that this was what Akali had really wanted to talk to him about all along. He acted hesitant, packing around. But our current experiment is showing promise. Just a few more months or maybe a year or two. Akali sneered. You really think the old witch will let us go after we complete the perfect body transformation experiment? You might not know this, but the old witch has many enemies out there. From what I've gathered, both Lord Herbert of Firefly and the subordinates of the Wind Sprite pair have searched for her in secret. Anyone who caught a trace of her was killed. Akali's face contorted slightly, as if recalling some terrifying memory. You think we, who know the old witch's hideout, will be allowed to walk away alive? Of course not. Saul wasn't that naive. He couldn't help but lower his voice. So you want to risk enhancing the locator to reach second rank? Just near second rank. Akali also kept his voice low. With our current strength, a real breakthrough would cause too much commotion. The old witch would surely intervene. Just the backlash from a failed advancement could kill us, so we only need to get close to second rank. But even close to second rank, we can't beat her. You actually want to kill her? Dream on. Once we're near second rank, we'll have the chance to escape. If we can make it to Firefly, or the Wind Sprite's territory, the old witch wouldn't dare chase us there. Akali's eyes were burning with intensity, as if he could already see the day they regained their freedom. We could even turn the tables and report the old witch's whereabouts to those 2 third-rank wizards. Let them hunt her down. That would be our revenge. Why are you telling me this? Saul frowned, feeling like something was off about this plan. Wouldn't it be safer for you to carry it out alone? Akali regained his composure, calming down again. I need someone else good at modification experiments to cover for me. Otherwise, the old witch will quickly notice that I'm using the lab work for other purposes. Herman, our master has already been doing that for ages. And why are you so smug about it? Seeing that Saul still looked hesitant, Akali cursed this indecisive youngster in his heart. But there was nothing he could do. He had waited 3 years just for someone strong enough to collaborate with him and fake the experiments. This young wizard clearly came from a theory-heavy wizard organization, capable, no doubt, but way too naive. Still, Akali didn't want to wait for another partner. He feared that before he found one, this Saul kid might complete the perfect body wizard transformation experiment. When that happened, the old witch might abandon this long-used hideout. To stay hidden, she'd likely eliminate all witnesses, maybe taking only one person with her. That person used to be him. But now it was probably Saul. And he couldn't let Saul realize that. Saul had to believe that both of them would be killed once the experiment succeeded. Only then would he willingly go along with the ruse. But enhancing the locator, it's dangerous too. While pondering Akali's real motives, Saul fiddled absent-mindedly with some lab materials. I need to think about it. The other didn't agree right away, but Akali had already expected that. He knew Saul might be naive, but not so naive as to say yes immediately. But that was fine. Akali had been here long enough. He had ways to make the kid realize that time was running out. Then think carefully, and don't even think about telling the old witch what I said. First, I'll never admit it. Second, even if she becomes suspicious of me, she'll become suspicious of you too. And once that happens, there'll be no escape. You'll just wait here to die. I get that much, Saul muttered, just like a young boy, unwilling to be looked down upon.